Warning, this podcast contains scenes of explicit nonsense and lore.
Resident Evil Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 69.5 and season 6 finale of the Resident Evil podcast. That's 0.5 more goodness and 0.5 more man flesh. I'm Nick, better known as Neptune.
Sorry.
Jesus.
After what we were doing.
Let's see who's joining us today. He's now the official Resident Evil Eurogamer editor. It's the Batman.
Hello there.
He's our star BOW. It's Stars Tyrant.
Hello.
He's a fan of epic proportions. It's Romby.
Hello.
And still appearing in bookshelves across the world. It's George Trevor.
Hi, hello.
Coming up on today's podcast, it's the season 6 finale, and we finish this season with one final look at Resident Evil Village in our trilogy of podcasts. This time, as it's a 0.5 episode, we hand the reins over to you guys and your thoughts on the 8th mainline entry. Oh yes, we have sent the call out to our listeners and you have not disappointed. We've had a plethora of MP3 call-ins which we're going to be playing today, so everyone can listen to what all the other fans are thinking. Expect an eclectic mix of positivity and negativity to try and balance out what everyone has thought of this mainline game. So let's start with the first one comes in from Umbrella Inc.
In preparation for Village, I did a complete series playthrough of my entire collection and realized that there is something that makes this series very special. This series has given fans nearly 3 decades worth of continuity, and that's been delivered in many different ways. I feel this is why Resident Evil endures. There's something gameplay-wise for everybody, and it's all shared under the same umbrella of the story and characters we love. Enter Resident Evil Village. Not only does this game achieve the goal of being a worthy successor to Resident Evil 7, but I feel it is also a worthy successor within the franchise itself. Capcom in the past has really struggled to marry Resident Evil's horror roots with the more action-oriented games that came later. Here I find this to be one of Village's greatest successes. Village differs from games like Resident Evil 6, which was a jack of all trades and a master of nothing, and it doesn't suffer the genre ambiguity of the Revelation titles. We're given a reason why Ethan is doing everything that he's doing, and it's contextualized in a story and setting that is beautifully interconnected and is varied but never feels tacked on. We're treated to a fun cast of characters that thankfully Capcom chose not to spoil aside from everyone's favorite tall lady. My first playthrough of the game was just entrancing. The pacing, the locations, the objectives, the story beats. As a veteran of the series, it's been a long time since I had to pick my jaw up off the floor during some of the story revelations. For me, the part where you find out what's inside that flask for the first time is gonna go down as a series shocking moment. I really think Capcom has made a Resident Evil game that does what Resident Evil does best. It's a dark, challenging story. It is really well paced. It's filled with interesting puzzles. And right now, I think this is a wonderful time to be a Resident Evil fan and have a game that we can be really, really proud of. Thank you guys for letting me share my thoughts. This is my favorite podcast to listen to, and you guys are doing amazing work.
Thank you so much, Umbrella Inc. What a lovely, positive start to the podcast.
I know. I disagreed with so much of it.
I just need to backtrack to the start. 6 years old in starting the franchise. Wow. Jeepers.
I mean, I must say, I'm very reluctant to disagree with anything. You know, someone who clearly knows what they're talking about and has been invested in the series, and has such a sincere connection with it. Was it just a couple of things just that I found I just couldn't agree with. I'm sorry, Umbrella Inc., but thanks for your call. Was I did find areas of this game tacked on, in the sense that they felt like almost 4 different sections of it's almost of a theme park, or like Westworld. You've got Future World, and you had Sea World, and so for me, and also, and this was my problem throughout the game, that parts that should have been for me jaw dropping, it should have been tense, should have been horrifically frightening. I found myself, and this is hard for quite a morose person that I tend to be. I'm laughing out loud. I almost laughed out loud when I discovered that was the fate at Rose. It just seemed so preposterous, and also because of the fact that it was being delivered by a very jolly jester.
I see what you're saying, and I do kind of understand why you would feel that, because the Duke telling you the big story points is a kind of detriment to the game. I will say, however, Ethan's reaction to it makes it it certainly made it shocking for me. I actually thought that was a fairly jaw-dropping moment, and one of the sort of darker areas the series has explored.
Especially for me, because I missed that file that was sitting right behind where the key is in the room with the house with the red chimney. I somehow missed that file the first time I played. And if you read that file, it gives you, it's not even hints, it blatantly basically talks about the baby being split between four, turning into a crystal. So I missed that. And then all of a sudden I'm being told this situation by the Duke, and you realise, oh, hang on, what?
Oh, that's interesting, because I missed that file as well. Okay, that's interesting.
But I think if you had read that file, I think
Yeah.
I think that file was actually mistimed. I think putting it there was a bad idea. I think the fact that I missed it was kind of a good thing, because if I had read that and it's so blatant, and then I find out, because then Ethan's reaction to that file is also, while being in that room, is that he goes, oh, this isn't the information I was expecting. I need to go talk to the Duke to find out more. But he doesn't seem shocked in the room at the time, because he makes those comments regardless of whether or not you pick up the file. So it's kind of weird when you pick up the file and then he makes that comment that you're like, oh, hang on, that's slightly disconnected.
Yeah, but isn't that file after you get told the revelation with the flask?
I don't think it is,
I thought
because
it was.
maybe I'm wrong. Hang on, because you've got the
You're
first
at
flask.
the crossroads. He tells you that you're holding your daughter's head in your hands, and then he tells you to go to seek for the house for the red chimney. I'm sure.
Maybe it is that order. I feel like he doesn't. Does he do it before he tells you to go to the place with the red chimney, or is it after? I thought he. Oh, maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe you're right.
I think so, because the first thing Ethan does to the Duke when he arrives at the crossroad immediately after the castle is show he like.
That's right. Okay, yeah. Forget what I've said.
Yeah, well, Mr. Winters, you're holding your daughter's head right there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, never mind. Forget what I've said.
From my personal point of view, I think what Umbrella Inc. says does resonate. I think the in-game storyline and what Ethan's personal journey is moving, and I think it's told extremely well. And I think I agree with him on the point that it's a worthy continuation of 7.
I 100% agree with that too.
It's funny that you mentioned like Future Zone and stuff like that, George, because I have actually seen someone on Twitter, and forgive me if it's a listener and I can't remember the name, but someone did literally link the map of the Crystal Maze and say and said Village is like this structure in a video game, and I can kind of understand that. Actually, I can get that, and that's not me throwing a funny aside or an anecdote or anything. Like the actual structure of it is quite similar to how like the Crystal Maze was laid out.
I think it's funny that we talk about we talk about the idea that a lot of things in this have been definitely heavily influenced, and it wouldn't surprise me if there are other influences to the idea of having the zoned kind of areas, or even on a developmental stage, they went, right, it's easier for us to divvy up the workload between people planning and designing different areas that they want to do.
See, the problem I have with that is it almost feels like there's more like not sinister motivation, but there's something further behind that, because was it Kato-san, one of the producers, that specifically made the point of saying we've toned down the horror from Resident Evil 7, which for me,
I think that's been blown out of proportion. I think that whole thing's. I'm looking at the reaction online. I think if you go back and look at his actual original comments under the context of what it actually was, they're just talking about in the moment scares, like making sure that tonally it's not always about being constantly frightening, and that's fine. I think you don't want people under constant stress, otherwise it's not an enjoyable experience. That's literally what they're saying. They're not saying about the overall tone. We can't have scary moments or anything. It's just about talking about constantly being scared. Because I've read reviews from people who don't really play horror games very much, and they struggle through bits of Village. There's some pretty obvious bits, and some bits that I was quite surprised that people would find scary personally.
I didn't mention Kato-san to focus on that. I didn't get the chance to finish. I mentioned it because he went on to say the reason why he was doing that is that he didn't want to close off Resident Evil to just fans that would be specifically looking for a horror experience. He wanted to open up the game to a wider audience, and I feel that's what they've done with having these different sections. It gave them an opportunity, almost an excuse, if you will, to have different types of gameplay. So you've got House Benevento, which is more like Silent Hill and the stuff that I'm looking for, and I really enjoyed about Resident Evil 7. But then you've got the more action oriented areas, and for me it just almost like, not disingenuous. It just felt that they're bringing something into the series that for me I'm not wanting to see. His excuse is we're opening up to a wider audience. He actually specifically said, the reason we're turning down the horror is that we want different gamers of different tastes to be able to dip in and out of it. But for me, they're trying to be everything to all men. Whereas I think perhaps that they should just keep this particular IP to a survival horror taste.
All right, well, thank you so much, Umbrella Inc., for that. Our next call-in comes from our patron, Harber. So let's see what he has to say.
Hey guys, Harber here. Wanted to take a moment to just call in, provide some thoughts on Village now that I've had a chance to complete it. Wanted to start out by saying congratulations to the team for getting to play the game early, you lucky dogs. Wouldn't have happened without the hard work and dedication you've shown to the podcast, so well earned. Could not be happier for you guys. If at the time I was not a little jealous. But now that I've played it, the big thing that stood out to me, and the one thing I wanted to kind of call out here with my call-in, was the environment, specifically the village itself. Coming into the game, I really thought, man, for a game to be called Village, this village better be good. And in my opinion, absolutely was. In fact, I'd say it's probably one of the best environments I've ever played in any game, the village itself. I think all of the environments were good and varied, but the one thing I wanted to kind of call out was the village itself. I loved the way the village was almost like a character. It changed, it evolved over time as things happened, as things blew up, or you got new items and could unlock things like the wells. It changed, it morphed, it became something different every time you were in it, and I thought that was really cool. I think the Capcom team did a really good job with that. It almost felt like a Dark Souls environment where you approach it, you see it, it's intimidating at first, but then as you kind of dig in, you start to find shortcuts and you start to unlock things here and there. And it just did a really good job. I guess just to come back to it did a really nice job. I'm a big fan of environments that can feel different just by coming at them from a different angle. And I think that was one of the things, on top of many, that the Village did really, really well. So again, congrats to the team. Congrats on the success of the podcast. You guys have been doing great. It's been keeping me sane during quarantine, and I appreciate it. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Harber. Obviously focusing on the environment, and something that the developers really hammered home before the game came out in some of their press developers interviews, that they wanted to portray the village as being a separate entity almost. Something we spoke about back on one of our earlier podcasts. Will they achieve that goal of the village itself being its own character? Harber obviously thinks that it did, and I'm minded to agree. I think, as you go through the game, you kind of, come through that snowy terrain, and then you see this huge village, and it's obviously, and you can see like the windmill in the background, and what's great is that you think it's just part of the background, but then it becomes, playable, and you've got the castle and so forth, and it feels wide open, and it's very much in the same manner as the Spencer Mansion or the RPD, in that it's this huge open area that you think you can go everywhere, but the game doesn't let you go everywhere, but you have that feeling of it being intimidating, and then as you start to explore, you find which ways you can go, which ways you can't go, and as Harber says, as you come in and out of the village, different areas unlock, you get different keys, and then you can go back, you can go animal hunting, you can use the well wheels, to find new items.
It's interesting when you revisit an area, like, perfect example is after you leave the castle, and if you look up, you can see the castle and it's kind of drenched in a bit of a misty fog, snowiness. And then if you come back later on, when you take the boat up the river and you go to drop the bridge, if you look up, it's bright and sunny now, late afternoonish, and it's sunny, and you can see the entire castle for everything now because it's no longer shrouded in this misty cloud anymore. It's it's quite an interesting change. I think this comes back to a bit what George was saying, like the village is both really good in tonal consistency for the actual environment, but then in some ways it feels a little bit disjointed as a gameplay motif. So I like the village as a village, and I think those Metroidvania light elements of being able to re-explore and open access areas that you weren't able to before is really cool. And I think that was one of my favorite parts of the game, was especially in the village, going back using the wheel well wheel to open the access, getting to areas that haven't been, new paths have been created or changed due to events that have happened while you've been away, hidden secrets, all that sort of stuff. I love that sort of stuff. But then it comes back to like when we're in the factory and the factory segment goes on way too long, and it's such it's not a jarring shift, but it's a shift from the style of environment, which was a big change. I felt like the castle definitely belonged to the village. It definitely felt like the waterways and the sunken village all kind of felt well. And the fact there's a factory there doesn't feel bad to me. It definitely feels like it could be part of the village. But once you spend too much time in there, then it starts to pull you out a bit. That's my biggest issue with it, I think, otherwise. But everything else with the actual village is very good, and it's probably one of the most consistent environments that Capcom has made for one of these games, I think, other than 7.
I absolutely loved the village area. I really did. I mean, I would have actually wanted it to have been a progressively sort of large area where you make your way to the castle, and I just would have, I mean, just there's some things about this game just changing would have made it for me, just in my top 3 Resident Evil games. I just kind of found, by comparison, certain sections, particularly Moreau, quite sort of anemic by comparison. And like you say, the change over time, and I think Nick mentioned this on the previous podcast, the detail in the different houses and the way it kind of set the atmosphere with the kind of the religious iconography that we got on, and the mystery. And Batman said before, like, you know, why he's loved initially turned on to the original game, he kind of an investigation through the Spencer Mansion, and I've kind of felt like that in this game at the beginning of Village, when I'm going through and looking through these mysterious houses and these, you know, fascinating kind of, you know, symbols on the walls and things. And I was really hoping that these details that is it Louisa or Elena, when she says, you know, that castle is full of nothing but blood and traps or something, and you know, you're just wanting to find out more. And again, that's kind of why we discussed in the lore section why I kind of felt let down. I didn't really feel we got enough of that in the castle. But yeah, the village, and it looked beautiful, didn't it? You know, the environmental, you know, the snow and the flames are just wonderful.
His comparison to Dark Souls is actually very good, because I did get that vibe as well, very much with the way if you've not played a Dark Souls game, then they are very much Metroidvania in sort of their structure. You know, you have like, you know, central areas, and you go off to side areas and things like that and get an item which allows you to unlock a previous area, you know, door or gate or access to a new part of the map, and in that it was very, you know, very much of that ilk. It also did a very good thing that From Software do very well in their games, is like when you're presented with an area, and I think you said this, Nick, about like the windmills and that, everywhere you can see pretty much in a Dark Souls game or a Bloodborne or whatever, you will eventually go to, and it was nice that they did that in this. You know, when you first look out, you know, when day breaks at the beginning of the game and Ethan arrives at the sort of cliff edge and he sees the windmills and the castle and the factory in the far distance, it's really cool to know. Well, and I can't really recall a game in the series doing this before, that you will be actually visiting all these areas sequentially through the game. It is very good comparison he makes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Harber. A really insightful call in there, focusing on the environment. So thank you very much. Our next call in comes from another patron, Snufferus. So let's see what he has to say.
Hey, series veteran Snufferus here. I'm glad I get to participate in this call-in to say that I had a blast playing through Village. I didn't play any of the demos and tried to stay as blind as I could before it actually released, and I think this is the way to go, because I had no real expectations going into the game. I know some people were upset that Lady Dimitrescu wasn't an overarching enemy, but I thought it was really awesome to learn that the game opens up so extensively after the castle. I had a ton of fun blasting lichens, exploring, and returning to the altar to sell treasure and upgrade my weapons. Each of the 4 lords were different enough in gameplay and presentation to keep things interesting, with the exception of the factory. That was the one bit I felt like droned on. When Ethan got pushed all the way back down, I remember thinking, God, I better get cutscened back up to the top. This game really played like a hybrid between Resident Evil 4 and 7, and did a great job of blending the two, I thought. As a Resident Evil game, I felt like the story was a pretty big letdown. Village could have gone without any Resident Evil ties and still been a fun game to play. Ethan is a mold monster? Okay, that's pretty silly, but whatever. Rose is feeling the growing pains of being a BOW? Oof. Did anyone else get flashbacks of the Resident Evil 6 post-credits scene from this with Jake Mueller and the apple? I wish Capcom would stop trying to make us care about new characters when the Raccoon City cast is so solid. Chris felt a bit shoehorned in as the story's action hero relief, but it was pretty cool to see what he looks like in action after 25 years of hunting BOWs. I think he cared about the Oswald Spencer revelation as much as I did. Spencer? Here? No way. And he moves on. +1 for the info dump at the end of the game again to tie everything together. Also, I don't know whose artistic decision it was to put the player through so much torture porn in the cutscenes, but I'd prefer it to be absent in the future. So much of it doesn't make things any scarier. Maybe I'm just squeamish, though. I thought the Miranda boss fight was also kind of forgettable. It reminded me of whoever it is that you fight at the end of Revelations 1 and solidified her as a one-and-done villain, despite the backstory. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the title very much. I loved all the Easter eggs in the beginning. I probably spent 20 minutes in the Winters' house on my first playthrough just examining everything and admiring the callbacks. Not to mention there were some genuinely awesome parts. The scene with the baby monster was absolutely horrifying. Overall, I'll probably play it to death for a month and then go back to playing the classics to get my RE fix like I've done with most of the recent releases. As a survival horror game, I'd give it a 9. It's a lot of fun. As a Resident Evil game, I think the references and mechanics that made a return justify a 6. Maybe as a longtime fan, I'm just too desperate for nostalgia.
Real overarching review there from Snufferus. And I think he probably shares a view held by quite a lot of other fans. So let's focus on the comment about the hybrid nature of the title between 4 and 7. I think that's spot on. I mean, that's what we said in our kind of like our review podcast, wasn't it? It was I maintain that this is the game Resident Evil 4 probably ought to have been.
It's funny because when we first did the review podcast, we said it was a lot like Resident Evil 4 and 7. I'd actually start to move away from 4 a little bit, although there's aspects of 4 you can clearly see, like the merchant and collectible treasures and things like that. In terms of it being a sort of smorgasbord, is that the word, of ideas, I think it's actually the game that Resident Evil 6 wanted to be, interestingly, and I've been coming to this conclusion quite recently. It manages, across its runtime, Village manages to portray, like, out-and-out scary PT-style horror with the Beneviento section, sort of almost does a nice classic RE throwback in the castle, and then obviously out and out full blown action RE 5-6 style with the factory. And I actually think that for all the run up and stuff they said in the promo to 6, how they're going to appeal to every single Resident Evil fan with this title with the varying characters, I actually think Village is a greater achievement of that, because 6 was. It wasn't that at all. So that was, I think they do appeal to various fans of the series with each of the sort of lords. And with the bit about the falling to the bottom, and mentioned this before, about how even Ethan comments that his journey in the factory is taking far too long. And I always chuckle.
It's a little bit. I mean, it does have its tongue-in-cheek kind of reason for being, but when you're already in the moment, and if you're as a player have already said, oh, this bit's dragging on a bit, and then like 10 minutes later the character in the game saying it's like, maybe there's a good reason, maybe your playtesters have been telling you this segment is a bit too overlong for what it is.
I did enjoy the Miranda boss fight. I thought she was actually quite a good I thought she was a good boss, a good villain, and actually I thought her final boss, I mean, compared to 7, and everyone knows I'm a big fan of 7. The end boss in 7 was just dire. But Miranda was really cool. It had, you could see her kind of changing forms quite a lot, which presented different challenges to the player, and I thought it mixed it up quite well. Spewed acid or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, she's like fiery acid. I have no problems with any of the generally most of the bosses, barring Heisenberg's mech thing. But my big issue across the board with all the bosses, although it became more obvious with the last 2, was there isn't a lot of feedback to the player in regards to how you're progressing in the fights. Does that make sense? With her, it's really hard to tell how much damage you're doing. There's no immediacy on if you're having any real impact on her until there's a cutscene. And I have a big issue with that with games in general, and Resident Evil Village is probably really bad in that respect. Like, you just keep hammering at them until something happens, and there's no indication that you're actually winning. And I find that really frustrating with a lot of the boss fights in Village, unfortunately.
I've watched a couple of people playing it on Twitch, and when the first time plays, and when they've got to like the Dimitrescu dragon fight, they're not sure whether they should be shooting the head of the dragon or Dimitrescu on the back. And likewise, Moreau, do you shoot the eyes, or do you have to expose Moreau's, so he emerges out the mouth, and that's the weak point? It's not clear at all. Like Resident Evil 4 is a great example of boss fights where it's clear what like the weak points are. They tend to be an eyeball of sorts or something like that.
Something that emerges, and the cutscene kind of makes it very clear. There won't be a cutscene or mini cutscene beforehand that makes it very clear. Or just simply that the animations in response to your weaponry gives you an indication, like you hit an area and the enemy stumbles, and there just isn't that in these enemies, and I find it very frustrating compared to the normal enemies, which are very feedback heavy. The other one is like people mention as well is that opening scene. What triggers the fact that all of a sudden you get shot in the knee with the arrow? There's no feedback as to how long that is. It just happens when it happens, and people get frustrated with that too. I've seen people playing it endlessly, just shooting enemies because they hoarded themselves up into an area and didn't get grabbed for ages. I find these sorts of games generally kind of difficult, and like when you don't have a lot of feedback to the player, and Village definitely falls in, which is such a shame because I think most of the other Resident Evil titles consistently through their entire franchise, as you correctly said, Sean, do this. It's the first time that it's really struggled to show that sort of level with the bosses.
Well, thank you so much for that, Snufferus. It was a wonderful call-in. We now have our next call-in from another patron. What is this? So let's see what he has to say.
Hi, this is What Is This from the Discord, and I absolutely loved Resident Evil Village. I've mentioned it. It doesn't even crack my top 5, but I think it is easily the best designed Resident Evil game to date. I had nothing but joy while playing it. It was just an absolute treat from start to finish. Capcom has truly shown, I hope, that they understand what makes Resident Evil so special. You know, they show that they can mix the action and classic survival horror elements. Some of the reviews sounded upset that it wasn't like a mind-blowing experience, but we don't need a mind-blowing experience. We need puzzles, we need inventory management, we need exploration, we need scares. Village nailed all of it and then some. The replay factor is insane. Like, I can't even begin to think how much time I'm going to put into it, because Village is like always on my mind right now because it's just so much fun to play. And that is the best compliment I can give it. It's not my favorite, but it is fun beyond belief to just play. And that's what you want in a video game. You want to be entertained. You want to think about it after it's done. And Village has done that. Like, I'm hooked on it, and I am just super excited for what Capcom is going to do in the future. Also, I hoped Chris was going to die in this game, but they somehow managed to portray him in a way that has me interested in him. So there's that, you know. Village is just awesome, and I think it's going to bring in a lot new people to the series, which will benefit us all in the long run, because this game has all the elements that we love, and if the sales are good, there won't be any reason for Capcom to drastically change it. Thank you.
Another happy customer, gents. Yes, really another praiseworthy appraisal of Resident Evil Village. Picking up on what we've touched upon already tonight, the general funness, if that's a word, of the game, and the replayability is what I wanted to talk about.
I found it an enjoyable experience to go back and replay and find all the collectible side quest stuff if I hadn't done it and stuff. I'm going to out GT here because he's gonna hate me for saying this, but I know he's only finished it once. So, this is the thing. You haven't actually given yourself a chance to actually go back. And I don't know how much of the side stuff you actually managed to do. Like, from a gameplay perspective, it's a fun game. There's nothing wrong with gameplay.
Yeah, I should actually point out as well that there was a couple of times when I remember asking Nick one of these things. I think, Nick, you had to point out to me, and I was impressed that when you said, "Oh no, there's side issues." I think I was trying to get into the door that's got the kind of like the guitar emblem on it. And I think it might have been Nick, pointed out that it wasn't essential. It was just kind of like a side mission. And there was a couple of times when I was kind of quite impressed with the fact that there were these opportunities to kind of be a bit more open world that weren't necessary to the main mission.
For players like myself who aren't the best at Resident Evil, the achievements are achievable, and you can use them to plan your points and what you want to progress onwards. So if you want to play on a new game plus with infinite weapon ammo for a particular shotgun, you can kind of plan your points based around that, go back into the game and get a particular achievement that you think is possible, such as the window breaking or getting all the files and things like that. And I was always amazed at how often I got new things, because you get rewards through them as you play the game, don't you?
The only issue I have with the whole system is that it's very easy to game because it's linked to, like, for the infinite weapons, it's linked to you fully upgrading a thing. So as long as you've got the CP points, you can make a save manually or typewriter, and then purchase all the items as long as you've got the money. Quit the game, unlock the infinite weapon, and then load the original save, and you've still got all your money and the infinite weapon now. so that you can just do that again for any weapon you want. And so it's pretty easy to game that system a little bit, unfortunately, by linking it to purchasing all the upgrades rather than earning it through a rank. But I guess that only makes it easier for people in general.
Thank you so much for that. What is this? Another fantastic call in. So our next one comes in from another patron, but also a very well-known streamer in the Resident Evil community, Death the Pursuer. So let's roll the tape.
Hello everyone, Death the Pursuer here giving my brief thoughts on Village. Very fine game. Great game. Starting off with a few positives. First, the Lycan ambush at the beginning is very intense, which I like. The 4 lords were great, unique, and were pretty fun boss fights in their own respective ways. Mother Miranda was also a pretty good final boss. Exploration in the game definitely feels encouraged, but not forced, which is a plus. The different environments are beautiful to look at and take in, especially the village itself and the castle, and the overall atmosphere remains consistent throughout most of the game for me. Now, a couple minor critiques for the game. First, obviously leading up to the final fight with Lady D, I feel like there should have been more to the 3 daughters and their encounters, and I would have liked a bit more uniqueness and strategy to their fights as we go from one to the next. I also feel like there could have been a lot more to Donna, Angie, and House Beneviento. Maybe even placing that section after Moreau's, as the Beneviento section to me feels more like a good halfway point or a sort of calm before the real storm section of the game. Overall, this game hits a good balance of horror, action, and exploration, which in some ways to me makes it feel like somewhat more of a more balanced and grounded RE4, if that makes sense. And despite kind of being in its own bubble with RE7, it's still a solid entry into the series and an 8 out of 10 in my book.
Thank you so much for that, Def. A nice balanced review as well, and obviously balance was being one of the focal points of his review.
I hadn't thought about the daughters thing like that, but he's 100% right. Like, having a variety, I mean, they end up being the same sort of fights. They could have, I mean, technically the third one, you've got the ceiling and you pull the lever and stuff. There's a little bit of a change other than smashing a window, but he's right. You could have had some variety in how they were dispatched, even if it was still the same reasoning. It was more of that. Each one was very different, but 2 of them end up. I mean, one of them's literally like smash a hole in the wall, and one of them shoot a window, and one of them's like pull a lever. It's not a huge difference.
For enemies that really, again, I mean, some of the designs and the presentation of these enemies are fantastic. I'm trying not to use that word iconic, but I love the daughters and their design, and just were slightly disappointing, as kind of sort of middle range bosses. Those fights were quite straightforward and disappointing. So I definitely agreed with Death's point about more strategy, in those fights. And also I totally agreed that the Lycans at the beginning, I fantastic. When you're kind of creeping up on them, and they do that howl, and I don't know, I just really felt that fear when they kind of, that they're going to rush you. And I've seen some criticism online actually of the Lycans, and people saying they're maybe not particularly fun to battle, or they didn't like the design. I really loved them as kind of the base enemy, the zombie version of this game. I thought they were fantastic, and they really kind of got me with fear when that howl, and you really think, shit, it's really going to kick off now. They're all going to rush you, and I actually also loved the fact that it only took about 5 or 6 of them. We didn't need 12, 13, 14, like Resident Evil 5 numbers of enemies. We just needed, I think 4 or 5 Lycans to feel enough like you're being rushed by a menacing group.
The fight between the Dimitrescu daughters, he's absolutely spot on. And did anyone else have that moment of absolute disbelief when the first one dies, thinking, are they really going to be taking out the story this early? Because obviously the marketing was so focused around the daughters and Lady D and the castle. When the first daughter died in the first 45 minutes, I was like, gosh, they really aren't that much of a factor in this game, are they?
I think that's part of the problem. I don't think that I think they've said it as much. I don't think they expected the whole Dimitrescu family thing to take off the way it did, as far as the public perception. So it ended up being part of their marketing a lot heavily once people were on board. But I think if they had known, it's a weird balance, because I think if they'd known what was going to happen with it, they probably would have had them stick around longer. It would have been one of those cases where the way that Heisenberg is would have been more Lady D, but then would have been to the detriment of the story or the gameplay or the focus. You know, there's probably not a right answer. I mean, I will say the other comment you made about changing the order of the lords and having Moreau first probably would have also, and having that lull, you know, for lack of a better term, the quiet calm before the storm, as he said. I agree with that too, actually. I think that would have been a better balance, going from Lady D to Moreau, then to Benevito, and then to Heisenberg in an order. Probably would have been a better flow.
I guess one of the more interesting things they maybe could have looked at doing, and obviously Heisenberg would have always had to have been last because of the way the story plays out, but if they'd actually made Dimitrescu, Moreau, and Beneviento optional in their order, and then they just change certain dialogues and things like that depending on which way you want to go through the game, that would have added probably the kind of replay ability you've been looking for, GT.
You would have got different dialogues, different scenarios, perhaps. 100%.
But a bit like Resident Evil 3 then, wouldn't it? Like kind of like your choice, almost like a live selection. So thank you for that. Our next call-in comes in from Happy Smelly.
Hello. I have a lot of feelings about this game. For all the questions and expletives that I have for Village, I do have to say that I appreciate it very much. It's a very aesthetically pleasing game that's fat with gothic opulence, fairy tale nightmares, and steampunk buffoonery. It was really fun to play, and overall it feels like a worthy Resident Evil title. Since RE7, I do think we're seeing an overall return to form with how these mainline titles are playing and feeling. I hope it's not too optimistic to say that it feels like Resident Evil gameplay is starting to find its identity again. I'm happy with the balance of action and horror here. My biggest problem with Village is that it focuses too much on that initial impression on the player without properly considering the deeper implications of these story choices or what happens after a second playthrough and the player's had a bit of time to think. That being said, the end of Ethan's story got me, and in my mind, it has the most emotionally impactful ending since the original Resi 3. There are some really silly moments and questionable choices here. I came away from the game fairly confused on what had actually happened, and I still don't think I quite understand the use of and justification for the umbrella logo being present here. While there's certainly plenty of variety and a lot to sink your teeth into, the story and characters feel fairly shallow and surfacey, and like during development was secondary to the gameplay and that first playthrough experience, which is honestly excellent and worth your time. Despite everything, I can't help but be charmed by Village. I really, really like it. I think it's really fun.
Some interesting points there from Happy Smelly. Thank you so much for the call-in. Someone who I feel, again, is quite balanced on Village. That's really seemingly the theme that we're picking up from a lot of the call-ins there. I'll hand over to Batman, actually, because she talked about the umbrella logo and how she didn't feel it really added much and was a bit confused by the storyline. I think you were of that opinion in the last podcast, weren't you, Batman, about its general involvement in the narrative?
It's because it's largely pointless, and it just comes across as though it was thrown in there to sort of appease, lore enthusiasts such as ourselves. I don't think it's not really relevant to the story of Village, and I think it was a bit of a con that it was so prevalent in all the marketing. Capcom built it up like it was going to be something really important, and it was just largely pointless. Its inclusion just comes across as completely superficial to me.
I agree totally. I think it was done simply for marketing, and that's it. So people go, "Ooh," but there's actually no substance of note to it at all. In fact, it's almost insulting to long-term fans, I think. I mean, I'd even extend that to Spencer's involvement, to be honest.
I was going to say, her comment about how they've put these things in without the deeper thought about the consequences is the perfect example, the perfect explanation to make a lot of these things. That they've gone, right, this is a cool idea, and not really thought about the long-term consequences, and that can be in regards to gameplay, it can be in regards to lore aspects, it's crazy to think that. We could be overthinking in the sense of why they picked it. Yeah, you could be right, it could be marketing, but it could have just been someone was like, oh, that seems like a really cool idea, and they picked up and ran with it without actually thinking about it either, it's because I can see why you would want to do to it, but they didn't really think long term about the impact of what that actually means to everything. Like, on a core concept, it's not a bad idea.
I'm certainly reluctant to give fans the writing pen, and things like that, because I don't always think it's beneficial to let fans write what they think should be the future of the series, because it's obviously their fantasies and whatnot. But it does say a lot that many of us have come up with better reasons for why the logo would be there, like linked to rival companies and things like that. And it just was very flat when you find out why it's there in the game.
On the flip side, though, she mentions that she felt that the Ethan storyline within the game really got to her in a positive way. Something, George, would you agree with? Did you find the actual Ethan progress that he makes a satisfying storyline?
There's definitely a really deep emotional story there, but I think it's too often clouded by me as a player being confused, and that was a point I think Happy Smelly mentioned about being confused quite often. And then the solutions we got to that confusion didn't really feel satisfying, because it was kind of just all dumped at the end, in that Alien Covenant room.
The lore room.
Yeah.
The lore cave, it's been referred to.
The lore cave.
I am see a comment Stars made about sort of almost insulting. See, I felt this quite often about insulting us as an audience, and then I'll kind of sort of try and check myself and think, well, don't take the series too seriously. But I felt it almost with the Clive O'Brien book and these kind of things that are just dropped in, and they do feel superficial. And that was something I was feeling often with this. It was just like a kind of like you say, just dropped in at the last moment just to appease hardcore fans. It didn't add anything really to the narrative, to like Umbrella's history. There's so much more, and the thing is, the history's there in the files. They just could have retold that story on the screen. In the files that we got. I mean, they make the point of going back to Brandon Bailey, but they actually could have retold the story and involving James Marcus, just built on what we got from Zero, if there was going to be that prequel element to it.
I think not my issue, because I don't actually mind that as an idea. I think where Capcom's gone is they want this solely focused on Ethan's story, so taking the narrative out of this is the thing where we were talking about in the last episode, where there isn't a lot to the history, isn't explained throughout the game really. You don't feel that empathy towards Miranda and what happened in the village and all that sort of stuff very easily, because it's not there, and because it's so solely focused on Ethan's journey. And so that as we've said, that room becomes like the exposition dump.
I do agree with her what she says there about the emotional resonance of Ethan's ending. I think she's right on the money there with saying very relatable to OG3's ending, which was quite a moment. I think that's a good observation. And likewise, you've just said something about Miranda there, Rob. That storyline, had it been told better and fleshed out, should be tragic. It should be awful, her losing her child to the Spanish flu. But because it's just presented so dryly, you don't get any empathy for her at all, do you? There's never a moment you sit there and think, oh God, I really feel for why she's doing this. You just don't.
It's something that I thought of after our last recording, which is that there is actually a really great parallel that you could draw here. Because Ethan is looking for his daughter. He doesn't want to lose his daughter. She's the potential savior for Miranda, essentially. But Miranda's only doing that because she lost her daughter. And so there's a really, really potential great parallel you can draw there, which from an empathetically was really interesting. But it never does that. Because for the player's urgency, we're obviously always focused about getting Rose back, which is understandable because that's games. But they don't draw out that connection that seems really, when you think about it, quite obvious.
And that's why I've said before, there really feels like there is I think that's why people have been forgiving, and we're kind of getting this balanced view from a lot of people, because there are a lot of very strong elements, and there's kind of a good game behind all this. And almost listening to Robbie, then you wonder, would better use of the intro rather than that Tim Burton stylistic thing that again didn't really add anything. We could have had maybe some sort of like we had those sketches with Resident Evil 4, the incubate, that guy that comes to the village, bringing the plaga with him. If we could have had told the backstory narrative of Miranda's daughter and the Spanish flu in the beginning, and carried that through in cutscenes and files.
That's a really good idea, GT. If they'd presented Miranda's daughter's death as kind of like a fairy tale that you see at the beginning, and then obviously it's presented without context and things, that could have been excellent, actually.
Right, well, thank you so much, Happy Smelly. Our next call in comes in from CK Present. So let's roll the tape.
What's going on, Resident Evil podcast crew? Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to call in, and of course, thank you for all the hard work that you guys do. This is CK Present, giving my thoughts on Resident Evil Village. I believe that your podcast episode is going to be primarily focused on the lore, but I do want to take the chance at the top to sort of discuss my general thoughts on the game. to kind of come out right away with it, I fucking love this game. It's amazing. And that's from someone who didn't really enjoy Resident Evil 4 very much. I bring up that comparison because I feel like it's a pretty apt one considering quite a few things within the game. So obviously we have the setting, which is really similar, and the title in Village, right? And those are the things that everyone is going to jump to and notice right away, alongside the return of the attach case and the Duke replacing the Merchant. By the way, Batman, is it canon now that the Duke and the Merchant were friends, or is that just a little weird quip / Easter egg one-liner in the game? Very strange. But either way, I was happy to have that addition back in a Resident Evil title. I thought it was very well implemented and led to some fun times, you know. Having that sort of discussion with yourself of, do I upgrade my handgun first, which is what I did, and I don't recommend. But the thinking was like, oh, I'm going to have as much ammo as I would ever need for this gun, as opposed to the sniper rifle. Then come to find out, well, you actually can only get infinite ammo for guns you fully upgraded, which is a system very similar to me to Resident Evil 5, which I also loved. I guess that brings me back to my previous point, you know, in the comparison with RE4, in that there's a lot of stuff in this game that pulls from various Resident Evil titles, but you can certainly see the attempt from Capcom, both in the theme of the game and in the actual moment-to-moment gameplay, to try and create a Resident Evil 4 version 2.0 or something like that, right? So we already talked about the Merchant and the upgrades to the guns and the shop, right? But there's also hunting in the same way that it was there in a limited capacity with Resident Evil 4. You can shoot fish and sell them to the Duke if you want to. You're better served creating a recipe from it, but that's not for me to decide. Additionally, the Kado, I don't exactly know how they're pronounced, but essentially function as Las Plagas in a lot of ways. There isn't sort of the bursting from the head with weird tentacles and appendages in the Lycans, but in some of the bosses, especially Moreau, and even to a certain extent Lady Dimitrescu, you can see it, right? And I think that's really cool, too. The series is played around with now sort of a mold or a fungus of viruses, obviously, parasites. So they've kind of touched on all the major sort of scientific explanations for why something like this could happen. But that's kind of neither here nor there. Let me just get to, I guess, the general idea of the lore. I think it's really cool how this game ties in Oswald Spencer, spoiler alert, and sort of kind of refocuses the events of the previous games and the history of Umbrella in an interesting way. Like, this game does tie into the larger franchise as a whole, but it is in a way that is not too obstructive, not too destructive, I guess, as well, to the existing canon in the existing timeline. At least for my simple brain to have figured out. Maybe you guys have some different insight into that, but I did like that sort of reference. I thought it was really cool. I liked the overall approach that the game took as far as story and lore was concerned. The files were really great. Having the journal, which thank you for shouting that out in your spoiler-free review to continue checking that. Had some good insight, and obviously being able to view the files at your leisure was awesome as well. There was some cool tie-ins file-wise. There were little Easter eggs to George Trevor, especially, you know, in the beginning of the game. So that tied back into the original Resident Evil. And yeah, I just thought that overall the package is fantastic. It's an incredibly polished game. It plays very well on a base PS4. For me, I have a launch model PS4, so not even the Slim or the PS4 Pro. I experienced no issues whatsoever. Only minor frame rate drops, I guess I should say, at the very end during Chris's section, which, by the way, the end kind of went batshit crazy a bit, but I guess that's okay. Did Ethan really need to be a conglomeration of mold, or would it just have been better if he was infected and that explained his extreme regenerative properties? That's something we already knew. And I'll leave it the last 20 seconds here by saying I hope that we don't necessarily get the sequel that this game sets up with Rose, unless she's going to join forces with like Sherry Birkin and Jake Mueller in some sort of like kickoff side story. But anyway, I guess that's where I'll leave it for now. I love the game. Really can't wait to hear you guys talk about it more, and I hope you guys have a wonderful podcast discussion. Take care.
Thank you, CK Present, for that. What I thought general overview review. Very good. Look, went into lots of detail there about his opinions on the overall game. First question, straight back to Batman. Can we answer that question? Is it canon that the Merchant is canon?
I would say it's just a nice little in-joke stroke Easter egg, but no doubt someone somewhere will be crafting a huge conspiracy theory about some kind of fraternity of global merchants who get together and influence every major event in the series. Make no bones about it, that person or persons will exist somewhere in the world. But
just like the meeting does.
Yeah. But I wouldn't read too much into it personally. It's just a nice Easter egg, just like Heisenberg's boulder punching quip.
I was exactly going to say that. It sounds like the boulder punching quip to me.
I think the character himself's canon. Obviously he's got a much larger role to play than what's revealed in the game. I think I said in the last podcast, I think he works for the Connections. I think all the sort of the crystallized remains of the four lords that you sell to him, I'm sure will get shipped to the nearest Connections laboratory. And it wouldn't surprise me, and I've been thinking about this ever since Rob asked the question last time, but who told Miranda about Rose? It could be the Duke. The Duke could have told Miranda, knowing, because he knows more about Ethan than he lets on, clearly. He seems to know Ethan's secret as well, so I'm putting it out there that the Duke is maybe the one responsible.
And they do allude to his presence in that one file you get in the castle, don't they? Where Lady D has a meeting with him.
Yes, yeah. So he's definitely canon. Where someone called the Duke.
Yeah, it would make sense for the Connections to have an agent somewhere where the Megamycete is, just to sort of keep an eye on it and stuff. So that's probably why he frequents the village so often.
It's interesting to hear he's very positive on the Spencer connection, and I suppose in one sense the comment he made about it being a not destructive edition it is a valid one. I mean, as much as we've been very critical on it, it doesn't actually do any harm in terms of. I'm not one of these people who sees Spencer's edition as being undermining or anything like that to his character. The only issue I have is his hunt for immortality doesn't take him back there when death's knocking on his door. That's all.
I don't think any of us would have said that we think it's a bad thing. I just think it's about the context of surrounding it. And as you mentioned, I think it was you, Sean, last time, talked about how it would have been good if, there was a file that basically said that Miranda had seen him as unworthy for continuing to share with, as if he had approached her for research purposes, What
about the comment he makes about the similarities of Resident Evil 4? I mean, everyone kind of realised this when the trailers first started to emerge, but there's a lot more to it, as he mentioned also, like the hunting. I don't think we haven't really spoken about that element. That's been expanded upon by 4, from 4, should I say. Were everyone happy with that element? Was it needed? Did it add anything particular to the game?
I just think it was completely oversaturated. It put me off because there was too much of it. The setup is basically identical, so much so that I just found it really off-putting. Like, Miranda's obviously basically Sadler, right down to the villagers having pictures of her in the houses. The Parasite, her infected subordinate characters reacting more favourably to the Kadu is basically a substitute for the Control Plaga. The epilogue drawings at the end were identical and depict essentially the same story as what we saw in 4. And then, of course, you have the Duke and other little things like the absolutely identical little boat rides. Pay respect to Resident Evil 4 by all means, but this just overloads and completely drowns us in it. Makes me wonder that Remake 4 is potentially going to be so radically different that Capcom can appease us by saying, if you want the original Resident Evil 4, go and play Village. It reminded me of, have you seen Predators, Rob? It's a good film in its own right, but it doesn't half over homage the original film. It just sort of takes you out of the experience a little bit.
But that's why I have a big issue with that in a lot of movies, where you take something that essentially is being made more for the audience's benefit than the actual narrative of the story. I have a big issue. There's a lot of movies in recent years have lampshaded kind of historic. Was it Star Trek Into Darkness and Spectre did the whole thing with their bad guys being given other names, and then all of a sudden it's a reveal. Oh, it's Khan, or was it Oberhauser or whatever it becomes, and it doesn't mean anything to the people in the movie so much because it's more towards the fans going, oh wow, and that's where it kind of comes back to. It's like these things become more of a reveal for the audience to see the acknowledgements and references and homages are not necessarily a bad thing, but if you, as you said, if you overwhelm people with them to the point where you're questioning how much of the game is original or how much of this material, book, movie, whatever it is, then you do start to lose people sometimes.
I felt it played differently to 4 though. I don't feel it was too over the top in terms of the action. I think it did the balancing a billion times better than RE4 ever did. Whereas that was just, as soon as you got past the village and you met the merchant for the first time, it was just non-stop. It never let go until the very end. Whereas I think this balanced it a bit better. It still had the kind of survival horror-esque moments and the tension filled more so than 4 ever did. I can see obviously that there's so many homages, and as CK President said, even with things with the hunting, which is relatively new, not that new compared to what happened in 4, but I felt the game felt significantly different.
The hunting's an interesting one because it is different in the sense that, like, in the original was literally like, here you can pick up eggs or hunt fish or whatever, because they were either sellable or food items, and they are still technically here, but they can be. Yeah, they've extended that idea, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Aren't you all forgetting Moira, hunting rabbits with a submachine gun?
Yes, quite frankly. I think we've all forgotten. Oh dear.
I try not to remember that, but
Well, thank you so much, CK Present, for that. A really, really insightful review from you. Thank you very much. The next call-in comes in from Mark Berringer. So let's roll the tape.
Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Mark from Boston. OG Showtime on PlayStation. Resident Evil Village. It's a mixed bag, isn't it? It's kind of the greatest hits of the series, for better or for worse. It's got the good and the bad of the series. Let's get the bad out of the way. The villains, comic book level villains, worse than RE4. I didn't think the villains could get any more over the top or schlocky than the RE4 villains, but here we are. They're not all bad. I like some of them more than others. The end, it's a common complaint for a lot of RE games, I guess, but the factory, it's not the most interesting, and it goes on a little too long, I think. Not my favorite area. The Heisenberg mech fight was certainly a low point in the game for me. I never sat around saying I wish I had a mech fight in my Resident Evil games, but here we are. Chris's section, pretty close to Call of Duty. I don't think that was needed. The big reveal for Spencer and Umbrella's origins at the village felt very tacked on. I don't think it added anything to the lore. In fact, I think it kind of takes away from the lore of the Umbrella Company. It feels like they would just put it in so they could use the Umbrella symbol in the game and in the trailers to get fans speculating, but it is what it is. The ending is confusing to me just in general. The Ethan reveal that he was killed by Jack is kind of cool, but it's almost like he's supposed to not know he has mold in him, but at the same time he's still attaching his hands when they get cut off. I don't understand why that was such a big reveal. Still don't understand why the ceremony with Rose didn't work for Mother Miranda. I don't know why. I don't understand what happened there, but it didn't work for her, so there you go. Just the ending was a little confusing. I'm going to play it again. I'm working my way towards the end, so I'll see if I shed some more light on it after my second playthrough. But that's the bad. The good, I think, outweighs the bad. The pros are awesome. The atmosphere is incredible in this game. The sound design is incredible, just like in the previous more modern RE games. They are really just killing it with the sound design. There's some sections that feel classic RE, obviously the castle, but just in the village, there's areas where you'll walk into a shack and you can hear a lichen growling. You don't see him yet because he's around the corner, but that every time that happened, it just gave me RE1 vibes of walking into a room and not seeing the zombie but hearing them, or walking to a room in the RPD and not hearing the liquor, or hearing the liquor but not being able to see it. And I love it. It was fantastic. As much as I gave the villains a hard time, I appreciate the classic horror tropes they did. They did vampire, werewolf, ghosts, mermen, Frankenstein monsters at the factory. Like, that was cool. That's a cool gimmick, and I think it was done, for the most part, pretty well. I love the backtracking. I love the optional quests, the mini-boss. The combat feels great. I love the little details they put in, like the Ingrid's necklace is revealed, and Ingrid, you can kill her down in the basement. It reveals she is the maiden from the demo. I thought that was very cool. The files are fantastic. The Baker incident, the 80-page file that I had to read before I even started the game up, that was fantastic. There were some great reveals in that. I thought Zoe was going to pop up because the way that file ended. We didn't see her, but that's maybe DLC, hopefully. As much as I didn't like the end, I did like Evelyn popping up. I did like that little callback. I always liked her character. I liked her as a villain, so I liked seeing her. Some of the questions raised for the next game are pretty interesting. The whole BSAA bioweapon thing. Rose being a teenager. I don't know if that's a time jump or if she's accelerated aging like Evelyn. I don't know what's going on with that. And then the mystery figure that walks up to the car when they're driving away. They're great mysteries for the next game. Final thoughts. I wasn't sure how I felt about this game, but I can't stop thinking about it. I think the highs greatly outweigh the lows, whatever lows they are. And playing it on hardcores, I like it even more now. So overall, I think it's a great RE game, and I'm excited to hear what you guys think about it. Hey, you're doing a good job. Keep up the good work. Can't wait to hear more from you guys. Appreciate it. Take care.
That was another really good review, actually. Looking through everything, interesting, isn't it? The fact that he thought the Spencer Umbrella reveal was damaging, where the previous one says it wasn't. It's
what I find fascinating is every previous call then is informing the next one, but generally in an opposite way. Which again, this goes back to the thing we said in our very original review of just like how divisive this game is. Everyone has a completely different opinion about it.
I was going to say, it's funny because when we sat down for the review, we were mostly uniformly agreed about things, which was interesting for us. But the fact that we could all see the potential for it to be that way was funny to me. Right?
Mark Plus was the atmosphere and the sound design. It's something I really picked up on when I played it.
Yeah.
I thought the sound design was top notch, and he's spot on as well with the. I remember exploring areas and then just coming to a grinding halt because I could hear I had no idea where it was. Trying to kind of pinpoint it. That was true, and yeah, he's right. That does harken back to almost the pre-rendered days where you would go into a room, but you wouldn't see these, the zombie or the licker because of the nature of the angles. So yeah. Go on, George.
No, sorry, I feel it's lacking something that those pre-rendered days had, because I do absolutely agree. The sound design was fantastic, but I did lament the kind of the omission. Well, I know people have said there is that save room music. It's so subtle. It's almost too, and I do like it when they do go subtle with the tracks. And it was you could barely hear it. And there were save rooms where they didn't have it at all. And I really missed what we did have in the classic era. The signature tracks you would have for particular rooms that you would associate with certain rooms. You just hear the track and you immediately brought into those particular rooms, and sometimes they were kind of associated with files as well. This sort of music, you associate with George Trevor and reading his file in the particular rooms you find the diary in, and it just adds an extra layer to the atmosphere. And I felt it was lacking that. Particular times I'm walking around the castle, and that's the thing. It is lavish and it was gothic, but there wasn't enough jeopardy, which you could have increased, you could have imbued with with sound design in terms of actual tracks. The castle was too quiet, I felt at times.
I'd agree. I think that it was too minimal in its sound OST, if you like. Yeah, I think the design is more so looking at the sound effects and the way it's planted around in terms of where the sound's coming from and things like that. So I would agree with that. What was everyone's take on the comment that the bosses were too over the top?
Cheesiness. Well, he did note something that we haven't really discussed too much. I know we talked about it in a preview episode, but we were talking about the variety of the monster type, in the
Yes.
classic monster concept, and we haven't really talked about it. Because last time we talked about why did the Pact of the Mold have such a variety of outcomes, and it's literally that that was the design. The design choice was that they wanted a merman, a Frankenstein's monster, a vampire. That's realistically the explanation for it on a design concept. So it's kind of funny to think about that. We've kind of gone from that point of thinking about this and completely kind of put that by the wayside. They're cheesy in a different way than 4s, I think. You made the comparison, and I'm like that 4 was pretty cheesy, and they were, but there was the whole game was written pretty cheesily. There's a lot of one-liners and stuff like that, and I think the reason why is maybe that's that tonal inconsistency. The 4 is cheesy across the board. Leon spouts one-liners as much as the villains are cackling, whereas you've got Ethan being quite serious, which is understandable and slightly dour, I guess, and it's a serious situation going on, and then you have these quite larger-than-life characters as villains, and I think that's the disconnect. It's not that they're perhaps cheesy inherently, it's just that they're so quite often over the top compared to the relatively groundedness of Ethan's side of things.
I have absolutely no problem with cheesy over the top boss battles for some reason. I don't know why. I don't want it in the gameplay. I'm probably playing the wrong game, so I don't want it in the dialogue or the narrative, but I almost forgive, and I kind of feel like sort of like a way of explaining it, but it's like you get a free pass, and I give Capcom a free pass for just doing as much as they want, making it spectacular, because it's a boss battle. And remember, that maybe goes back to my love for kind of games like Bayonetta. So I've got no problem with that at all. It's a Japanese game at the heart of it. It's kind of in that tradition. You've obviously got to be careful because you want the bosses to be consistent with the mutations of the virus that's done that. Resident Evil 0 bosses get a hard time, but I'll stand to be. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but they're all very consistent with the effects of Progenitor. So you've got to be careful. But in terms of the gameplay, unless they're ridiculous, like with Simmons, but I enjoyed. I think Neptune mentioned this. I really enjoyed the the Lady Dimitrescu, Lady D battle, I thought was great, because sort of nice kind of it sort of change around with the sniper rifle, and so
I think
I
think all the boss battles were actually quite good. But I mean, Batman, coming to you about this then, with what George has said about the consistency of how the virus works outside of perhaps Lady Dimitrescu, there's not really much of an explanation as to why Heisenberg becomes Magneto, why Moreau becomes whatever he becomes, and why
whatever that is,
and why and why we suddenly have Chucky.
That's my issue with it, really. I mean, I'm not expecting massively detailed breakdowns of why the mutations occur, but we just don't get anything. It goes back to Rob's point. Capcom are obviously so consistent on wanting the vampiric imagery and the merman stuff and the sort of steampunk Frankenstein stuff in there, that they didn't really take into account what makes these creatures Resident Evil. Like Peter Fabiano made that comment shortly before release about how trying to reassure everyone that all the creatures can be explained within the rules of Resident Evil, and I don't think that's strictly true. It's just, they've designed these creatures because they want to appeal to sort of Eastern European folklore and stuff, fair enough, but there isn't enough of a Resident Evil explanation behind them. The mold is just too much of a MacGuffin in this story. Basically, the black goo from Prometheus, isn't it? It just does whatever it needs to do without any explanation behind it.
The villain's not getting any clear explanation. I mean, what's Miranda's? She goes down into a cave in grief, touches some black goo, as we've just described, and for some, that's it. She just becomes Mother Miranda, and you just expected to that's fine. She's just a perfect adapter, I guess.
Well, as I said to you, that's a lot. As I said last episode, a lot of convenience, and that's just the plot. It's the convenience of this. It's what it needs. The mold does what it needs to do for the plot, and as exactly as John's alluded to.
It doesn't need that much work, because I remember being very critical of Resident Evil 6 in particular with what the C virus does. But I think, John, you'll confirm that in the kind of Biohazard 6 guides, it says, well, in order for the NAPAD to become a thing, it was C virus mixed with a bit of gorilla DNA. And that is all we really need. You go, okay, fine, got it. That's why it becomes. Yeah,
but you don't even get that in Village, I don't think.
No, you don't. No, exactly. That's the point. Apart from, as I said, maybe outside Lady Dimitrescu with that kind of blood.
Moreau's thing with the wolf blood.
The wolf, the Vacarak, how he created that, was adding more wolf DNA, wasn't it, to the kind of Kadu made his pets, if you like. Happy with that. I was actually happy with the Samak and even the kind of slave zombie creatures. I was happy with them. I think it's quite limited.
And
just
the brothers.
Absolutely. I think it was just the bosses as to why these things happen. Why did he become a fish thing? Why did Magneto exist? And he could have said,
why the lichens occur just because they wanted them to.
I don't mind lichens, because you can just say, well, this is what happened when someone is infected with the Kadu, they become a lichen. I think that's fine. That's exactly the same as why if you're bitten by a zombie, you become by T-virus, you become a zombie. It's just, that's what it is. I think it's the evolving on from that.
Listening to kind of our frustration with, and that point again about insulting us as an old gamers and our connection to the older games and the narratives that made sense and having, boss battle mutations that were logical with the viruses and having files that explain this and a narrative that steadily unraveled during gameplay. I just feel that the writers and the people that are in charge and the custodians of this game at the moment just aren't as connected to those previous games that we are as fans. It's not going to jar with them that they have this completely superficial story that, like you say, Mother Miranda just wanders into the cave and Batman's complete disregard for the fact that outside of this, Spencer's desperately trying, to find the elixir for eternal life and, all the resources he pumped into that island that Alex Wesker was on. Why do that? And I just feel, there's just this complete disconnect with who you talk about, being very, Stars mentions being very careful putting the writing in the hands of fans. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but I think fact of the matter is we need someone in charge of these games, in charge particularly of the writing, not necessarily maybe the game mechanics so much, but the writing that has some understanding and connection with the previous games.
And yet, conversely, I'll throw this in. I think in trying to tie back has compromised 7 and 8's narrative a little bit. 7 was clearly trying to be a soft reboot for the series after the sort of bloat and nonsense of Resident Evil 6. And one of the reasons why I embraced that game so much is because I was totally on board for that. I felt it was time for a fresh start. I felt the series really needed it. And then gradually, sort of by the end of that game, you get Chris reintroduced, and now in Village, you're getting callbacks with Spencer and Umbrella, and like I said, like we've alluded to, they're not hugely destructive, but it's almost like it's got one foot in the past, whereas it really wants to be confidently striding forward, I feel.
I agree with that fundamentally, but then I still think 7 was doing that too with the whole umbrella, blue umbrella, there's a helicopter with the umbrella logo, blah, blah, blah kind of thing, trying to keep that the HCF reference, I think it comes back to the same thing. I sound like a broken record, but it's that thing about trying to be something for everyone and no one at the same time, because you've got to have something intriguing and interesting for moving forwards, but you've got to keep people who are already invested, involved, and interested.
Let me ask you this just randomly. How would you have felt if this game's base enemies, instead of lichens, were just moulded? So it's nothing necessarily new, but it has that continuity with Resident Evil 7, and it makes base mould infection a bit more consistent. Essentially like how we had zombies for the first sort of 4 games in the series and no one complained.
It wouldn't have bothered me because I thought the moulded were a great enemy design, to be honest.
Yeah, the only thing I would have said about that is that if it gave you an opportunity to expand about the types of molded, because that's just what sequels do, I would have been perfectly fine about it having the same and some new types.
Definitely. That was one of the things. I wanted that consistency. Thank you, Mark, for that. Always nice to always generate discussion and points. So thank you so much. The next call in comes in from Ronnie.
Hello, Ronnie here. I was a big fan of 7. I enjoyed Resident Evil Remake 2 a lot, but was very disappointed with Remake 3 for the same reasons I was a little disappointed with 8. The build-up to launch had me very excited, but it was oversaturated with Lady D for obvious reasons. It was really cringe at times to see one of my favourite franchises turn into a thirst trap for sales. But once I got into the game, the beginning had me hooked, and I very much enjoyed everything until Lady D's transformation. The explanation, puzzles, even if they were simple, and the files kept me intrigued. There was a couple of jump scares, the pursuer parts were decent but short-lived, and the basement was chilling. But once the dragon showed its face, it was over the top, gigantic and fantastical monsters again. Just like I said when Nemesis was 10 times bigger than it was in the original and filled the entire building. The Beneviento section was terrifying the first time and really well done, but on subsequent playthroughs it's more comedy and horror. From that point, there was nothing new and things continued to be over the top until its peak with Heisenberg, a really daft boss, quite frankly. In between bosses, it felt more like The Witcher than Resident Evil. Very well presented, but it did lack mystery and intrigue. I love Witcher, but I don't want Witcher in Resident Evil. The most terrifying part of 7 was Jack chasing you around. Resident Evil 2's remake was Mr. X. It doesn't need to be gigantic and silly to keep you entertained. The gameplay, as in how the game felt, was standout. It was fluid and smooth. However, I did feel like Ethan was superpowered and that the pace used in Resident Evil 2 remake is more suitable for survival horror. I never felt under threat in Resident Evil 8. The inclusion of Chris was bold but poorly executed. His explanations made no sense, and another example of shoehorning. If you played 6 and then went straight to 8, you would not think Capcom had learned the lesson at all. It's been said before, but the early Resident Evils relied on pseudoscience which used real-life ideas in a fantasy setting, but 8 was entirely fantasy, full of holes, contradictions, and so many elements shoehorned in. It's as if the beginning and the end of the game was decided on day one and some intern had to figure out how to get from point A to point B. I've always felt this way, but if you look at the millions who bought Resident Evil 8 and how many people are hardcore fans, then that segment would be so small, the effort to cater to them wouldn't be as profitable as to cater to the rest. Mystery, puzzles and horror is what I subscribe to, and I will always buy the mainline games. Capcom probably know that. Us lot will buy whatever they put out, so they go for people who are on the fence and it shows, and again with the Lady D stuff. I enjoyed the game for all its fault, but just like Resident Evil 3, I finished the game thinking, I wish they hadn't done that. It didn't live up to my expectations because they are so high from all the good stuff that they've produced and memories that they've given me over time. But some very well executed DLC could really save this game and make it an overall package and fill in a lot of the holes. Thanks very much for listening and keep up the good work.
I'm worshipping at the Church of Ronnie. I don't know if you would agree. This is a strong word. There was parts of that was almost scathing. I don't know if that's too harsh, but the criticisms I completely agree with. But particularly, it's coming. He says at the end, it's coming from the love what he wants, and again he describes what he wants from Resident Evil, and it sort of matches with things that we've talked about in why we were so engaged with the Spencer Mansion and how the story was kind of outlaid in that. I agree with that. The thing with Lady D, look, in terms of it's become a separate fandom in itself, and I'm not going to look down my nose at that at all. It's completely non-toxic. It's totally celebratory. It's brilliant. But my issue with it is the elements of not the elements of that, but it's how Lady D, how she affects this game. And he's right. I've said this before. It's comedic when it should be scary, and I found it very difficult to, just in terms of that character model and how she was presented, to be scared of. I mean, that was a gameplay mechanic, wasn't it?
I'm going to give Capcom a bit of a pass here, because I don't think they quite knew what they had with Lady D. It all blew up, didn't it, after the second trailer? But she was already in the first trailer. I think it was only the second trailer where where people realised, oh my god, she's really tall. And I don't think anyone really quite picked up on it. So the internet exploded after that, by which time, of course, so much of the game was already done. And everyone was like, oh, I can't wait to see Lady D in action. And they're like, oh, she's not really in it that much. And I think we called it, really, didn't we? Everyone was like, I think she's going to be out, first boss and then done, that kind of thing. So I know what you're saying, George. I wouldn't give Capcom too much of a hard time over Lady D, because I think it was just something that happened very organically on the internet that they had no idea was really going to happen. They played up on it, don't get me wrong, afterwards.
Look, I completely agree with you, Nick, in terms of the reaction to it. Absolutely, they're not. I'm not going to hold Capcom liable to that. And it's great, the sense that it has brought a greater audience, to the series. But I'm just talking specifically in terms of, Lady within the game as a gameplay mechanic, as a character, and none of that resonates with me in what I would want from a Resident Evil game in terms of the character, in terms of how she's presented, and how the gameplay mechanic as a stalker. It just doesn't work like Jack Baker at all.
Yeah, I think, Sean, you mentioned on the last podcast, or Rob, one of the, in terms of the list of stalkers, she wasn't that effective at all. She could easily be outwitted, unlike Mr. X, who was actually quite challenging.
It's such a minor part of the game as well. I mean, it only amounts to about probably, not even 10 minutes worth of time in the game. I really liked and though he was scathing, I actually found that Colin very constructive. So, bravo for that. I have a total agreement with him about what he said about Resident Evil 6, because I kind of alluded to that in the last couple of call-ins. Everyone likes to make the comparison to Resident Evil 4, but at times, in terms of it being such a myriad of ideas and trying to appeal to so many different fans all in one package, I actually think this probably has more in common with Resident Evil 6. So it's nice that someone out there is in agreement.
Long live Resident Evil 6!
By the time you're running around the factory in what is essentially a Doom Eternal clone or something like that, you would not think that much has changed from the kind of shenanigans Resident Evil 6 was pulling. It's a perfectly valid comparison, in my opinion.
He mentions The Witcher. I've never played The Witcher. How similar is it? Because he's talking about the exploratory part of the game was close to The Witcher. I can't comment. I've never played it.
So it's the concept of the open world space and hunting, and there's elements that but as we've alluded to, this game pulls from a lot of different sources, or you could draw comparison lines between this and many other games. So and it's a common thing, and I guess that the only lament for that, which I think we've mentioned before, is that you go from you could say something like 4 was such an impactful game on the industry that influenced other games, and so some people might go, oh well, it's sad to see that 8 is not going down that path, and it instead relies on other games. But that's the industry. Games influence each other, just like books influence each other and movies influence each other. It's not a bad thing as long as it's done well. It doesn't feel like a complete rip-off, and it's it's with intent of making the game a better game. Then there's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. The Witcher wouldn't be a popular series if it wasn't a good thing. So you can't necessarily say that's a bad thing. And there are other things that you could say that are in here that are like other games too. But there are mechanically most things in the game are done well. It's just really most of our quibbles tend to be with the narrative concepts more than anything else, perhaps. And other than that, maybe the boss fights. So,
any comments, Batman?
I agree with pretty much everything he said. I mean, the boss battles, I wasn't a fan of the big flying dragon either. It's just that sort of thing just doesn't belong in Resident Evil for me. But I know the series has to evolve. It's it's 25 years old now, so they have to come up with new ideas and concepts. But that sort of thing is just not what got me into the series in the first place. And I've never understood the big deal with Lady D. I mean, like you said, she's got this huge fan base, and I don't get it at all. I don't understand where it's come from.
Yeah,
but fair play to those who do like her. I'm not knocking it, but
I've got two good reasons.
I don't get it.
These games, I don't know for you, with each installment, is getting further and further away from the elements of why I fell in love with the series in the first place, in terms of the story, but very much so now with the gameplay mechanics. And I think that entire Lady D fandom has very little, if anything, to do with survival horror or the investigation that we loved unfolding in the Spencer Mansion. Or
you say that GT, but I found 7 was the most beautiful throwback to the original game.
Well, no, I loved 7.
And then you've got to think about the fact that fan bases and people enjoy different things for differing reasons. So 4 was popular for being different than the original games that came out before it. Things evolve and change, and you're not going to love or enjoy all of them. And it's about picking and choosing the things that you do. I mean, it's very easy. We've talked about this before, that there are people out there that you kind of start to go, why do you still involve yourself in the thing if you haven't liked a game in like 15 years? Like every once in a while, a game will come along that you actually go, yeah, I really enjoy that, or I enjoy elements of it, or the things that are good about it make up for more than what I don't like about it.
Yes.
And that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't. And I think that's why the episodes like this, where we listen to people calling in with their ideas, is great, because we get to listen to a variety of ideas. People mention things that perhaps we haven't thought of or others haven't thought of, and that's the whole point. Everyone's got a different opinion, a different entitlement, and a different understanding, and they will like and dislike things, and no right or wrong really with that at all. I know it's such an obvious thing to say, but it's a great concept, but especially in a franchise that's been going for 25 years. You know that it has to evolve and has to change, and you can't expect that everything's going to be pleased. Everyone's going to enjoy everything that happens.
You only have to look at the variety of the call-ins we've had so far. I mean, I know we're working toward the end of them now, but like no 2 call-ins have been the same. This has been probably the most wildly different batch I can think we've had of a single game in as long as I can remember.
Well, let's keep it going. Our next call-in comes in from StitchFan93, so let's see what he has to say.
Hi guys, hope you guys are all doing well. So for my audition for the Resident Evil podcast, I would like to add my own addition. I come from an Asian background, and I have a psychology criminology degree. Basically what I've done is that from a social-cultural point of view, I've tried to analyze not just Resident Evil, but various different kinds of media. In East Asian culture, 4 is considered an unlucky number due to the fact that its Mandarin meaning sounds very closely to death. A very good example of this application is, spoiler alert, in Village, Ethan Winter's diary early in the game, dated 6th of February, is found just before he is thrust back to horror, and just before the final fight with Mother Miranda, it is dated February 10th. This is actually a bit of early foreshadowing that he will die eventually at the end of the game. If you guys interested, I've posted various tweets and about this kind of 4 reference in Resident Evil and such. You may check it out online. Thank you.
Well, there you go. A very different calling from StitchFan93 there.
Too highbrow for me.
It's very...
You say too highbrow in a forum where we pick apart every single nutty little detail.
Yeah, the way.
I think it's highbrow enough. It's good.
I thought that was fascinating, actually. Seen these kind of things before, but never actually done a deep dive into it. But yeah, I'll certainly check that out.
I've always been interested by this, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it was, I think it was the second Silent Hill Evil game, and I started reading the influences about sort of the sorts of concept horrors and things that were, because obviously the developers were Japanese, and they were trying to blend this idea of Western. They were influenced by Western movies and materials, but wanting to add that local kind of flavor to it and trying to find those things that could blend together. And I remember reading through lots of little things that are superstitions, things that are considered, what's the word I'm trying to think of, but considered taboo, or they're symbolic of things, and adding those things. And dates and numbers are a particularly great thing, especially in various Asian cultures. They can symbolize something, colors as well. So yeah, I can imagine there's probably stuff in a lot of the games that we perhaps from a Western audience probably wouldn't really understand or see, because we don't know them. But once they're pointed out, it becomes much more obvious that they're there and they do influence these sorts of things.
There's a couple that I can think of off the top of my head in terms of Resident Evil. Keeper's Diary in the first game, the final entry has the random number 4 in it, and although that's supposed to maybe represent the fact that you can't remember what date it is, it's also symbolic with the word for death, or associations with death in Japanese and Chinese culture, and also the 4th survivor in Resident Evil 2. It's not necessarily because Hunk's the 4th survivor of the game, it's that association with death as well.
Yeah, well, he's Mr. Death. There we go. Well, plenty of food for thought for our listeners there. Thank you, Stitch Fan. Our next call-in comes in from regular REP contributor, the Selfish Gene. So here we go.
So the feeling I get playing this game is that very obviously the gameplay comes first and the story second. And most of the story is Ethan being left in the dark, which is really lame, but you guys have been over that. I'm sure every entry in the series is like this, in that it puts the gameplay experience first, but for me in this title it just feels very obvious. Probably the most obvious since RE4. So is the gameplay enjoyable enough? And for me, it's line ball. It's very, very close. There's parts that I like, but there's other parts that I really criticise. And I mostly criticise them for how they just fall short of being, in my opinion, ideal. I like the gunplay and the enemies and the challenge of the game. There's a lot of good environmental storytelling. I like that it's a story continuation. More of that, please, Capcom. I like that they don't say the vampire word. Lady D doesn't transform into a giant bat. It sidesteps the obvious and doesn't become really derivative of other pop culture, and it keeps its own identity. The action's a bit too bombastic and over the top for my taste, but that's personal. To me, it feels like a bit of a greatest hits package. Resident Evil has stalker enemies now, so here's our stalker. We have escape room gameplay, so here's our unarmed escape room part. I really like the idea of the optional bosses, like the mill, but now I'm going to get into some criticisms. And I think the weapon upgrade system is a nice example to illustrate my issues. I found the upgrade system confusing, to be honest. So Ethan can upgrade his guns with the Duke, but he can find gun parts during his adventure, but he can also buy gun parts from the Duke. They want to dictate your play with the part upgrades, but then they also want to offer freedom with the Duke's upgrades. I like both the supreme freedom of the RE4 style to play how you want, but also the very traditional style where you find the gun when you do. I don't think this hybrid system adds anything of value over either of the two ideas that it draws from. I was expecting it to be like RE4 where the game responds to your weapon usage, but the game will still give you sniper rifle ammo if you sell the gun straight away. Looking into the gun stats after defeating the game, I thought I'd invest in a different loadout on the next game, but unfortunately each gun is mathematically superseded once you collect the next gun in its class. And then the lack of fun exclusive upgrades makes the upgrading system feel undercooked. I'm not at all against doing something new, but commit to it rather than doing old ideas out of tradition, it feels. And it feels like it's doing these ideas out of tradition rather than having a system that actually serves the game. And I guess that's illustrative of other issues I have with the game and my criticisms. Other things in the game have been done before. Village just falls short. Things have been done better. The stalker enemy has been done before, and it's been done better. The escape room gameplay has been done before, and has been done better. It tries to do a lot, and I think it suffers a bit for it. I think if the next entry is like this kind of ghost train one horror experience to the next, it won't feel fresh at all. And I really enjoyed that freshness, that slight familiarity with RE7. And in a follow-up to Village, I'd like to see confidence in any new ideas that they try.
Well, thank you, Gene, for that call-in. Always insightful. Places a lot of talk on the weapon upgrade system. Again, something I don't think we've really had a good discussion about. Be interested to hear what everyone thinks about that and his comments that there wasn't. It was kind of a halfway house. I'm not the best person with guns. And upgrades. I don't really know how it compares, but I've
blocking or systems
all
or
the
difficulty or
in general.
Sorry, Nick.
Thank you. He's true. I mean, I've always said I don't like games where I have a lot of choices. This is why I can't play Mass Effect. This is why I don't do RPGs, because I feel I'm always making the wrong decision.
I know, John. I had to.
Or you're worried about the ones that you haven't made. That's a real common one with those games.
Exactly.
Really,
it's like, you know, and am I going to get?
Have I made the right decision? No.
I get angsty in Revelations 2 about whether to pick up the gun or not, because I can't remember which is the good ending.
Harry giving you the options in the caves in the original Resident Evil 1 must have fucked your head totally.
It blew my mind. So it's interesting, isn't it? It's there's lots of gun choices in this, and Gene's right. It's there's choices, and do you upgrade? Do you waste all that money on a particular upgrade when then you get a better shotgun, for example?
Point really moaning about it, but that entire system I wish I could just rip out. I just don't want any of it. I would much prefer it when you would find the weapons, as almost like a reward for exploration or a particular enemy boss battle, and I would much rather spend my time thinking about which particular weapons worked with which particular boss battle and have that, because obviously you made some really good points, particularly about kind of ticking boxes rather than actually thinking what would work well for this game. Gene mentioned, there are highlights, and so far it hasn't been mentioned in the calls. I loved the areas in the basement, with the blood up to your knees in the blood and the ghouls that you're hunting, and I just felt that it was just so short. I would have loved more of that. There's this section, if you guys got to it, where you've got these kind of like hanging bodies, and there are these ghouls walking towards you, like or shambling towards you, and there's this one point when there's this very thin corridor, and it's well executed, well thought through, great game design, the way they funnel you in this kind of maze, these claustrophobic corridors effectively in this passageway, and you can't make out what is hanging body and what is the ghoul coming towards you, and it was a great moment, and I would have wanted more of those sections. It's surprising no one's actually mentioned that yet,
because I remember that was in the demo as well, and was a good laugh. But okay,
with Gene's call, I mean, it's a case where I see what he's meaning. He's not just talking about the weapon system; he's just talking about fundamental kind of design concepts, which is like there are definitely cases where they've done systems but better or different. Things aren't always going to be improved, but I definitely can see things like an ammunition system based around what you want, but obviously then it's a fixed pickup collection system, which is no different than, say, the original pre-rendered games where you always knew you get handgun ammo here or whatever, but obviously the difference there was you weren't dealing with like upgrading weapons other than attaching the occasional extra part you found, and that's an entirely different system. I don't know, maybe it's about reinventing the wheel and trying to figure out a new system for this type of gameplay that isn't just aping on previous ones, but as we've kind of established already, a lot of the things in this are re-aping ideas or taking ideas and putting them in a new way. He made a very good point about the Dimitrescu fight, that she didn't turn into a giant bat, so I definitely agree with that. That would have been far too on the nose. So
Stars, what did you think of Gene's comment about the weapons upgrade or anything else that he mentioned?
It's so tricky because I don't mind it from a gameplay point of view, but in universe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, I tend to be against these kind of overly forced gamey things, and that's what I said in the review podcast, that it feels very gamey in a series that usually hides its immersion pretty well. Like Resident Evil 7 is very sort of straightforward in terms of it being a cinematic experience, and you're playing a role in a story, whereas this feels like a game to a fault, and that is only compounded by like the merchant systems and the weapon upgrades and things like that. So I tend to find I agree with him. Yeah, my preferred way, as I've said many times, of playing Resident Evil 4 is to just negate the merchant altogether and just stick with the 3 weapons that you can pick up in the game, and you can't really do that in this one because the merchant's a lot more forced upon you. You still pick up the weapons in world, but not quite the same thing.
Batman?
It was more the ammo crafting thing I had a problem with, because there was no urgency about your ammo supplies in this game. Every time I ran out of ammo, you just press the pause button and craft 60 handgun bullets just like that. Like Sean says, I prefer my Resident Evil to be a more cinematic, interactive movie experience than like an arcadey video game one.
I think that's why an element that I found normal, mode, difficulty level, just too easy. And then there was that almost seemed too far a jump, with the hard difficulty. Is it Mad? I always forget if it's Madhouse or Hardcore. Is it Madhouse?
It was Hardcore.
And that was a big thing for me. Yeah, Batman. You just loved that's like a pillar, a fundamental element of survival horror. That scarcity of ammunition, and that's what then gives you that huge amount of tension. I can remember being in save rooms in the Spencer Mansion, shitting. I can't leave because I've hardly got any ammo in that hunter. Hearing
There's
that
a hunter out there, yeah.
Yeah. I just would have wanted more of that.
This is also made twice as bad with repeat playthroughs. By the time you're sort of on your second or third playthrough, you look through your crafting menu, and no joke, you will have like 60 junk parts and things like that to be able to make bullets. Even if you play them on harder difficulties, it just becomes so negated with your weapon upgrades that nearly autopiloting through the games.
I think it was you that had said that you didn't even craft something for a large chunk through the game. You just had never used it until you really needed to use it.
I'm a fairly conservative sort of player anyway. I didn't really... The only times I ever really needed to craft sort of higher power ammunition was in the boss fights, and that was it, if I was running low on some sniper bullets.
I only ever bought the 3 recipes because I never thought I'd need any more. I never felt the need to buy to have more mines or pipe bombs or anything like that. I never felt.
I used the pipe bombs a fair bit, but mines I certainly didn't.
The only time I used the mines was when I was playing the Mercenaries game.
Yeah,
they were really handy. Oh, and if I had them, I'd use them on like the mill boss because he's really good he's walking around a lot. So I just drop him on the ground. So boss like him, it was really good to use. But
yeah, I tend to reserve them for bosses. They're okay actually for Lady D in her form because you can get a couple of because she does walk around a bit in the towers, so you can get a couple of cheap shots using them. So, but yeah, I never felt the need to craft them or anything like that. Thank you, Gene. Always a pleasure, my friend. The next call in comes in from Mr. Shanaman69.
Hey guys, I just wanted to give you some quick thoughts on Resident Evil Village. I really enjoyed Village. For the most part, I think it is really, really well done as far as environments go. The only one that I'm really kind of iffy on is the factory. That one, it's got good and bad to it, so I can't quite put my finger on how I feel about that one. The best one for me was Castle Dimitrescu because all I could get from it were Resident Evil 1 vibes, and I could just feel the nostalgia hit me, and I mean that with a complete and total compliment, because I felt all I wanted to do was the game to slow down right there, and it does for a little bit, so I can just kind of explore. The other thing I want to bring up is how do you guys feel about how they handled Chris in this game? Because for me, I feel like when they announced Village at the State of Play event last year for the PS5, they kind of teased that he'd be doing more of an antagonistic role in this game. And, well, I kind of felt like how Yoke did during the announcement podcast you guys did last year, where he said, I don't think it will mean much. I think Chris is going to do it for a reason, and it's going to be like how Leon and Chris were in Resident Evil 6. It's not going to mean anything. I kind of feel like, yes, there was a reason story-wise behind it, why he didn't tell Ethan at the beginning with Miranda impersonating Mia, but I feel like it was just for marketing purposes. Anyways, hope you guys have a great day. Enjoy the podcast a lot, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks. Bye.
Right, well, thank you so much. A bit more of a positive call in there. Obviously enjoyed it quite a lot more, which is great to see. So 2 elements he speaks about. The environments, we'll come to that in a second, but he asks us specifically, and again, I don't think we've had a big discussion about Chris here. What did we think of Chris's involvement in the game, and specifically Capcom's marketing with him perhaps being a baddie? I mean, I think we all kind of saw through it, didn't we?
For me, it's almost Chris in this game kind of personifies just all the problems, with the actual game that there was a great idea in there. It was just the poor execution. I love the idea of a Dark Chris. I love the viral videos we got with Resident Evil 5. The live action with Chris with PTSD, and I just thought this was a great idea. I really want to see the characters develop in different ways. Even an alcoholic Leon, an embittered Chris that has been sidelined and is outside of the BSAA, and but they're just the whole execution, and we've had to unravel in the last podcast very kind of detailed and complicated narratives as to why Chris actually, and then we've realized maybe that does make sense why Chris holds everything back, but you shouldn't have to get to the point of a convoluted podcast we want to be engaged in the game, we want to find this out in the game. So I just the whole execution was poor for me, but a great idea in there trying to get out.
That point about Resident Evil 6 is really valid too, because obviously the whole thing about that face-off between Chris and Leon was the catalyst for how they wanted that game to really coalesce. That was their target idea. That was what kicked off the what would draw those two against each other. So it'd be very interesting to see if there was a target idea here with what they wanted, as well.
I think they
Through
handled
that
Chris quite
concept.
well. I think they handled Chris well. They said that embittered BSSA. I think that actual storyline was quite good. I think the criticism is about why didn't you tell Ethan what was going on at any point? I think Batman, you mentioned perhaps in the last podcast that at the beginning, perhaps it was okay not to tell him at the beginning, and you need a bit of shock value. That's fine, but why didn't he come clean in the reservoir and say, look, this is what's going on? Instead, we get, you're out of your depth, and it's like we've just taken out two of the lords.
That's the funny thing, isn't it? Is that Chris chastises Ethan for getting in the way and being useless. Yet at that point in the game, he's done far more than what Chris has achieved so far, from what we've seen. Unless DLC will go into this, obviously.
I think John had a point last time, which was really, really good, which was that he didn't trust Ethan at the start because mold, blah blah blah. Like, there's good reasons for it. It just isn't explained again. Like, if that came across later on, so that it was really obvious, you'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that definitely. Now I understand why Chris was holding back, because Ethan hadn't earned his trust. He wasn't sure if he could trust Ethan. For all he know, Miranda had turned Ethan, or Ethan was another replacement, and was just as evil as Miranda was. Who knows? You don't know, and it wasn't until that point. And then everyone would have been like, oh, okay, that makes sense why Chris didn't tell. But instead, as I talked about last time, the game just lampshades the whole thing. The Capcom writers just go, it'd be funny. Let's throw in some references and reasons for why, and blah blah blah, and then we'll move on. Like, it's not really an explanation.
I just think Chris's role needs fleshing out a bit more. There's obviously a big backstory between him and Miranda, and I think all we get is one throwaway line that he's been chasing her for 3 years. But it sort of reminded me of when he was chasing Carla. He's maybe not as vicious as he was in Resident Evil 6, but it gave me that same sort of vibe that there's a bit of personal history between them. And obviously we were told early on in 6 why he was so pissed at Carla, but we never get that reason in Village. And I think because we don't know why Chris, we don't know the history between Chris and Miranda, it's sort of lost on us really why he acts the way he does in the game.
I was going to say, do you think that would be DLC? Do you think perhaps we hold fire on that element, or do you think the DLC that's been announced is going to be something completely different?
I think if the DLC has just been announced like they say it has because of overwhelmingly positive feedback towards the game, then I think it's just going to be a patchwork of dropped scenes that were already created. So maybe some early Village stuff we saw in some of the early trailers. I'd like to see, a Not a Hero Part 2, but don't think it will be. I think it'll be more sort of the early stages of what happened in the Village.
And I think they're definitely going to heckle on more of Lady D, seeing as she's popular for that reason too.
Yes,
involved with it.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was the thing that's interesting is there's a potential for like a backstory to that whole thing with Chris in regards to the ship with the Dolby that created the Dolby incident. That there's some connection going on there that goes back to Miranda and the connections that has Chris's involvement in it. That is the reason why he has this real deterrence to stop her because of what's happened, and that could be very well explained, and it could almost be a story or a movie or a game on its own or a DLC, I'm sure, if they really wanted to, but I don't know if they'll ever go down that path. So that could definitely explain Chris's motivations a lot more, going back to that event and everything that's happened with the BSAA since.
Well, thank you so much. Again, wonderful comment there. Our next call in comes in from Redfield 56. So let's play the tape.
Hello, this is James. I also go by Redfield 55 or 56 on any of the forums or on the Discord there. I just wanted to give my thoughts on Resident Evil Village. Overall, I enjoyed the game and had a great time with it, but there's a few drawbacks to it, of course, as with any modern Resident Evil. And one of the biggest ones I feel is Mother Miranda. She doesn't play a big enough part in that story, especially for how much she is built up over the game. I don't think she's really as big of a payoff, or there's not enough scares surrounding her that she feels like she's missing from a good 2/3 of that game almost, and that's just a disappointment. And that may be tied to the fact that Capcom toned down the scares a bit for this game in that she doesn't show up as much. And it's a really big contrast when you look at the Lords, who have strong, distinct characters, compared to Miranda, who you don't really get much outside of the lore room, where you get to read through all of her files and her backstory, but it feels like it's a dump right near the end, and at least in terms of gameplay, it feels very poorly paced. The other thing I wanted to mention that may or may not have been mentioned already is I do have a lot of enjoyment in the game's influences there. They're very on the nose at times, but I enjoy the fact that Mother Miranda feels like the boss fight at least feels like it's straight out of Silent Hill, and you can very easily tell and see the influences there. And I like that each boss has their own classic horror influences there. That leads to the one other big detriment is I don't understand why we can't return to Castle Dimitrescu as probably one of the strongest environments of the game. You really don't get to spend enough time there, and it's kind of a shame because you can tell there's a lot of care put into it. Well, that's all I had for you guys. I want to keep it brief, so have a good rest of your day, and I hope it's another lovely podcast.
Thank you, Redfield 56. Yeah, I was annoyed, like he was, that you couldn't go back into the castle when you came back into the village. It was very much drawbridge up, that's it, you're done. Which was a shame, because if you've missed anything, and I'd missed what's in Lady Dimitrescu's bathroom? Oh, the lipstick.
The lipstick.
Yeah, I missed that. I was like, damn it, this is my second quest. And I was absolutely determined to get everything, and I missed it. I
just can't understand how they can design this incredible playground for survival horror. Just so ideal, and then just limit it in terms of size. Thinking back to what we were expecting and podcasts that were talking about what we were looking forward in the game, the exploration. And I remember one of the producers saying that in this game you're going to be able to approach problems from various different angles and go forward in your exploration in different ways. It was going to be very open world. No, Peter Fabiano said that no section would be. You could literally go from start to end and back again. No section would be sealed off, and also they just didn't fill it with enough enemies. Stars mentioned before about how the pursuit by Lady D was a short section, but that should have been much larger. That should have been a more prominent part of that gameplay.
You can go back to the beginning pretty much, though, can't you?
So from the cabin section and the walk in the snow, once you slide down that hill, you can recover most of the village and just about every area except for the castle. So.
Yeah,
which is a weird thing that they put the drawbridge up, because it would have been interesting just to go back, because it's not like you could drop back down off the end of the tower again or anything like that, because you'd assume that the bridge was destroyed. But the rest of that, they could have had you re-explore or have to go back to get items or put another treasure in there or whatever. They chose not to. So
I've read that there's the castle's actually a lot bigger. I think there's a lot more unexplored areas of it, which again could lead itself to DLC. But yeah, they reward you for going back to areas, and you fight all the Valkyrak kind of sub bosses, don't you? The one outside Louisa's house and things like that. They could have allowed you to go back in, and then you suddenly find yourself being stalked by another thing. And that'd have been they could have done anything. I wonder if it's just a loading issue. I was
literally going to say, could it have just been to save on resources for last gen machines?
Yeah.
Like in the PS4 and Xbox Xbox One owners, let's say 360. The lore room the lore cave comes up again though. Like it is such a exposition dump.
I wouldn't have been at all surprised if you'd gone in there and Mia was grotesquely dissected on a desk.
Why was Mia even still alive? Why was she being kept alive for?
Plot. I think that's it. I mean, it is it. I think it's so that there's some sort of empathy, and so that Rose had at least some parental figure left rather than being an orphan.
I think they'd made the decision that they were going to kill Ethan off. They didn't want Rose to be an orphan.
John, did you agree with the caller's comment there about Mother Miranda not getting enough screen time? We kind of spoke about at the beginning of some of the call-ins today. There wasn't enough empathy or understanding of her actual position. Yeah, and what she was trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And I stand by what I said in the last one. I think she's one of the worst main series villains we've ever had, because there's just not enough to her. We know absolutely nothing about her. Can't resonate with her at all. We don't know anything about her, and because of that, it's hard to feel sympathy for her in terms of what she's trying to do. And what's her end game going to be? If the ceremony was successful, is she just going to walk off into the sunset? Does she not want world domination like every other villain in the series?
I think that's not a bad thing to be nice. Like, in a sense, if she doesn't want world domination, but she just wants a peaceful existence in the village with her daughter, well, that's fine. But it's not.
Yeah, that's fine. But does that really inspire fear?
No. And I think that's a cruel irony with her as a villain, is that this is probably the first time in the series that you have a character, a villain, completely overcome with grief to the point where she's doing these elaborate schemes to try and bring herself a sense of peace and reunion with her lost child. most of the other villains in the series are, crazy megalomaniacs. Although I suppose you could say Glenn Arias was doing it for personal reasons. But
Heisenberg is more your traditional enemy in this. Like, he's the one that wants power and control. He wants to use Rose as a weapon, and he's more traditional fit almost of that style.
I know previous villains have been driven by a sense of like personal purpose, like Simmons with Ada and whatnot, but this is the first time where they could have really lent on doing some sort of emotional draw to making people feel something for Miranda, and the fact that that idea down worse than probably any of the other villains in the series is just a cruel irony almost.
I'm thinking of Alex Wesker, but it wasn't just saving herself from a terminal illness, was it? I think she wanted that and world domination.
Yeah, world domination.
I think the world domination was there first, and then the illness aside.
Okay.
But
then Alex Wesker would have had a similar problem if she'd just been introduced properly in Revelations 2. We got that one scene with her as a human, and then she mutated. No one would have cared for Alex. It was only because we'd had previous backstory.
Yeah,
we knew about her character. That's the only reason it resonated.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Think about the people that maybe didn't know that backstory or hadn't really realised about it to begin with, who are just taking that on face value. They probably don't have that depth. It's a lot harder. You've got to... This is the funny thing, because Capcom's got this idea about like making these games... I don't want to say self-contained, because that's not correct, but like entertaining in of themselves, and storytelling should be involved in that process. You need to explain the story within the story. You can't just expect all the ancillary and previous games to always inform players of agency of other characters or enemies or whatever. Miranda's thing is underbaked because she's never been established before this game, and she then isn't explained. But if the explanation came in a previous game but it wasn't like obvious or main, then you would still lose that if you only played Village. You know what I mean?
I think she suffers because we don't see her till the end. I mean, you take someone like Simmons, for example. He was a brand new character, but because they introduced him very early on, and straight away you could see he was this sinister, shady type, you started to resonate and sort of build up with him. Whereas Miranda, you just get that one scene where she kills a villager, and then we don't see her till the very end, and then you just get that one quick scene, and then she transforms.
I don't know why Capcom have a problem with with a main game antagonist that can span more than one game. Obviously they devised one of the most iconic in video game history with Albert Wesker, and just think what we could have had. Everyone bemoaned how quickly Alex Wesker died after being introduced, and there was a missed opportunity there. But again, we 6, 7, and 8. I mean, I don't understand. They've got the recipe. They've seen the success with what they generated with Albert Wesker, that people are still going on about him and we're waiting for him to come back to the clone, aren't we? But
the problem is they're chasing Wesker still. That's the problem, and I think the answer was in Simmons, but they just didn't have the idea to develop him further beyond that game. Simmons should be the recurring villain for this series now, really.
Interesting you mentioned that. The final call-in comes in from regular contributor as well, Colin Evil. So hold on to your hats.
Hi guys, it's Colin Evil. I know what you're thinking, for God's sake, what's he wanting? No, I'm only kidding. Apologies again about the amount of swearing in the last one. You shouldn't really need to keep this away from the kids' ears this time, because I'm going to try not to swear. I can't promise anything, but I will try. So, Village. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot more than I did 2 and 3 remake. Village was good. It was back to being a bit more creepy. The people that say that it's a good game, but it's not a Resident Evil game, they said that about 4. People are saying, werewolves and vampires, when will it end? Mate, the original one was zombies, Really, zombies, werewolves and vampires, to me, they come under the same sort of thing. They're all, they're all that sort of horror sort of style. Lady D, I expected her to be in it a lot more. I'd managed to avoid so much of it that I didn't even know about Heisenberg. And when I saw him, I was convinced for the first little while that it was Nick Cage that was doing the thing, because it sounded and acted like Nick Cage. And really, as a protagonist chasing you about, can you really do better than Nick Cage, When he called Chris the boulder punching bleep, that did a popped for that big style. Really enjoyed it, found myself engrossed in it. I found it started getting a bit same old, round about the time of the factory, but it was still good once I managed to get through that bit. But yeah, I did. I really enjoyed it. I found, like you guys have said, it's answered so many questions, but put so many more there as well. But it's tied up a lot of loose ends, for me anyway, I feel. And Ethan, I thought, must be... I didn't think infected but moulded still. Well, I was unsure. but I thought it was maybe some sort of hybrid of the moulded and one of the viruses, and he was maybe taken to it a bit like our old mate Wesker, who is still alive and is coming back in Resident Evil Phoenix. And I'll tell you a bit more about that towards the end of this, but my theory on how it can definitely happen. But anyway, yeah, just finding out who's moulded, knowing that Chris wouldn't be a bad guy, but then thinking, what's going on? Why is this? The initial sort of concept art, when I looked at it again, I was convinced Chris was going to be a werewolf, but I was wrong about that. But overall, I thought it was quite a good game. I really enjoyed it. I don't know, I did enjoyed it quite a lot. I would go and play it again over the other ones, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Hopefully it's as good as this one. Sort of in leaving here, the reason why Wesker can still be alive, I know he went into a volcano and it's molten hot, but Ripley fell into molten lava, didn't she? And they managed to clone her. So why can they not clone Wesker? He's alive, I'm telling you. Thanks, guys. And yeah, thanks for the podcast and everything that you do. Peace.
Yeah, Albert Wesker's coming back and he's wearing a kilt, Colin.
What a way to end our last call in. I thought it'd be quite amusing. But talking about Albert Wesker, we cannot escape him in this fandom. It is impossible.
Someone give me a drink.
I burst out laughing when he said Nick Cage. I was just not expecting that at all.
But what a lovely positive, I think, for a lot of people, and myself included. This certainly a fun game. I felt it was more Resident Evil-y than, say, Resident Evil 4. So I get what you're saying about that, and lots of twists and turns. Whether you think all the twists and turns worked, I thought often said that the actual in-game kind of storyline that you're progressing through with Ethan keeps you guessing, keeps you on the edge of your seat as to where's this. Raises those questions about why is Chris so pissed off? What have I done? That kind of thing. So I think it worked, and I do think it's one of the most replayable RE games in a long time. So I think it's a really real positive, and some good comments there from Colin.
He raised a really interesting thing about the lore concepts and how people see the difference between zombies and, say, vampires and werewolves and stuff. It's interesting. I think there's a key thing that has always been tied into zombie lore, which is that it's very easy to see, and this sounds really weird to put it in when I'm about to say this, but humanity within zombies, you know what I mean? Because they are just people at the end of the day. They're not transformed. They're just the Walking Dead. They're us beyond death. And whereas vampires and werewolves have always seemed a little bit more fantastical because there's transformation, there's change, and it seems like not everyone can be a vampire in a general sense in the lore, even though you could change anyone. Most people become victims of vampires, whereas anyone can become a zombie. And I think that's the big detriment, but also benefit to how people see those things is quite different. I don't know if I agree. I could put them in the same realm, but they're still fantasy monsters. But there's a bit more humanity to zombies, perhaps, that people see themselves in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Kenichi Iwata, who wrote the writer from Resident Evil, and he wrote some of the files, and he wrote the Keeper's Diary. That was the purpose behind the narrative of the Keeper's Diary was to get across the humanity in the zombies, and he didn't want people just to to see them as kind of as cannon fodder. He wanted to see the human behind that, the humanity in that. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's always one of those things I remember back, and this is to the credit of the original games as well, is that I always remember thinking not just about the humanity, but what the mansion and what the labs would have been like before the outbreak, because of those files, because these people existed in these rooms, like what it would have been like living in that environment and working in those labs and stuff, because of those were written. And it's the same with the RPD, with the police, like what it would have been like to be a normal day in the police station and having to deal with Chief Irons and all that sort of stuff. Like, I always thought that was quite interesting, and I think that's something I do feel I lose later in the franchise when it becomes these big fantastical elements and crazy monsters. I'm not thinking about so much what life in the village would have been like for the villagers, except for maybe during those end credits when you see that kind of narrative story going on. It makes you think a little bit more about what the village life would have been like, and what it would be like to have those sorts of things happening in the village.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity. We could have quite a few files. I mean, we had that a little bit with Revelations 2, from the notes we got about what life was like before Alex came to the island, and how she, and initially, she was seen as a savior, as a goddess. Could have definitely had that a lot more in this game, I think, like you say. But Neptune mentioned the rooms were so detailed and beautiful when we started exploring the village.
Yeah,
I imagine maybe the DLC will pick up on that, because we saw these characters had a lot more prominence in some of the early trailers, Louisa particularly, and so I'm sure we'll probably get that in the DLC. But yeah, that was a missed opportunity. We could have definitely got a lot more narrative
Just
in the
don't talk
past.
to me about that trailer, GT. It grieves me to this day when I watch back that first trailer now.
I think that's going to be. We're going to get that though, aren't we? I feel with the DLC.
We'll have to see. We'll keep an eye. That is it for all our call-ins. I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who has taken their time out to send us our call-ins. I think everyone would agree here. We've had an eclectic mix of different call-ins and opinions and viewpoints that really have opened up the floor to a lot more discussion, which is why we do these podcasts, because we always think it's important for people to share their views. And as I said, there's so much things to talk about, especially in this game. It's useful to hear what everyone else has to say. So I'd like to say thank you to everyone. And whenever the next big game comes out, I'm sure we will do another community call-in podcast. But of course, we will accept call-ins for other podcasts as well. So if there's anything comes up, we'll let you know, and then feel free to send them into us.
Long live Albert Wesker.
There we go. So that does finish our trilogy of Resident Evil Village coverage. It's now time for the season finale of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
For the past 8 years and 5 seasons, we have brought you groundbreaking lore, in-depth analysis, game reviews, and high-quality content. We've also brought you untold controversies, countless tales of underhand tactics, all in aid of the quiz.
I'd just like to announce everybody that this is 0 points for me this week. Thank you. Goodbye.
So my nomination person said 7, but I didn't agree with 7. I said it was 7T, and then you said it was 17.
I didn't want people to think I'm cheating by just saying the same number that someone else has said. So I just the next number that sounds similar to 17. I swear I did not cheat, yo.
Jesus Christ. What fucking question is that?
Quite frankly, if we only got 1 point and that's the winning score, then we're not doing our jobs right, and we're all going to have to hand in our biohazard cards.
Welcome to Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. Batman. Star Tyrants. George Trevor. Robbie the Pecker. Mr. Spencer. Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
Welcome, one and all. It is the last edition of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz in Season 6. We have a decent mix of questions from the community that have sent them to me. It's our standard 5 questions, so if everyone can clear their desktops, let's begin. Question number 1 comes in from Aaron Z. What is Billy Cohen's prison number? Question number 2 comes in from Jordan Osiris. In the Medikit version, or the Medikite version of Resident Evil, what slogan is on Chris's alternative costume?
In the
Media Kite.
Said that before
I'm
me.
Medikit version. What the fuck?
What's the Media Kite? I assume
the publisher on PC, I believe, isn't it?
Oh, I've never heard of
Medikit version.
I'm completely.
Why did he say PC? Fine, I'll rephrase. In the PC version of Resident Evil, what slogan is on Chris's alternative costume? Question number 3 comes in from our listener East Estrada. Well, in Resident Evil Remake, you find someone who has taken their own life, so they weren't zombified. Before doing so, they killed another person. Who was this?
I was thinking of this far before we were talking about, the humanity.
I thought you might have been. I thought as we were talking about
it. People talk about the Keeper's Diary, but
this one's pretty good.
There's a few, there's that, and the Suicide Note as well.
Question number 4 from Vito. Oh yes.
no.
It's not too bad. It's not too bad. In Resident Evil Survivor, what is the date of the first report made by Nikolai? Finally, question number 5. Oh, what's that noise? Oh, it's the non-canon alarm. Oh my days, brace yourself.
No.
This question is even more non-canon than normal. It's so non-canon, it's meta. This comes in from Mako. This was something that was actually mentioned in a previous podcast, so were you paying attention? Which pop band would regularly have their music played at the Biohazard Cafe?
Ooh, why is it non-canon?
Because the Biohazard Cafe is not a canonical...
Oh, so I was miles
This
away.
is
I was
something
thinking
Alex told us, but now I can't even remember.
It
I
is
was thinking of
something.
the band that you get referenced in Outbreak. I wasn't thinking of the Biohazard Cafe.
Regularly had their music played at the Biohazard Cafe in Tokyo.
Oh my god!
Which band
It's
was...
a real band.
Yes. Oh yeah, very much so.
I mean, that's beyond non-canon. That's
what I said.
Just ask us any. Ask us.
That's
that.
not
I
even
know.
a Resident Evil
I
question.
know.
I mean,
Just ask us anything.
Not this again, no.
Ask us about who just resigned from the cabinet.
They are the 5 questions. We're going to go straight to the answers. Let's see how everyone has done. So that first question from Aaron Z. What is Billy Cohen's prison number? Batman.
oh, fuck, I have no idea. 275.
Stars
No
time.
idea.
WKD 4496.
I think you're getting it mixed up with some...
Might be wrong. I don't know
That's
about
funny.
you.
That popped into my head too. So Christian, it was the first thing where I was like, no, hang on, that's a different game.
See, here lies the difference between someone who smokes weed and someone who doesn't. Sean turns it into a joke. Sean has the wit to turn it into a joke, whereas I was sat here thinking, I swear I know this. And I was thinking W, but no, that it's the wrong person I was thinking of.
George, do you know
Well,
Billy
I thought
Cohen's
I did,
prison
but
number?
then Sean turned it into a joke, and I realised, no, that was Rockfort. So, no, I don't. I should have been paying more attention, no.
Okay, Romby?
1020. I don't know. I have no idea.
I'm
1024.
I'm going to give it to you, Rob. It's 1036. Pretty impressive. So, yeah, it's 1036. So, good point from the New Zealander. Question number 2. In the PC version of Resident Evil, what slogan is on Chris's alternative costume? Starren.
I actually don't know this. It's a variation of his Made in Heaven leather jacket, but I don't know. I honestly don't know what's on the back of his PC version. It's the what I've had the least amount to do with that version of the game, unfortunately. So I don't know.
I'll give you a bit of kudos there for working out that, yeah, it's a variation on the Made in Heaven one. So, Romby, did you know?
No idea. I used the PC version a lot back in the day to take screenshots, so I should have remembered this. But
Did you have the Medikit version, Rob?
Batman, did you know?
Not suitable for tumble drying.
George Trevor, did you know?
No, I've no idea. No.
The answer was Brave Bomber. Brave Bomber.
It's Air Force outfit, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, yes. Very good. It's a good question.
I think the picture is a plane, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yeah. Thank you, Jordan. Good question. Question number 3 was from East Estrada. So in Remake 1, you found someone who took their own life that weren't zombified before doing so. They killed another person. Who was this? Stars Tyrant.
I have no idea. I don't really play the remake much these days, and I'm assuming this is related to the Suicide Note or something like that.
It is a remake. We'll come to George last because he sounded quite confident. Romby?
I had no idea. I was jokingly going to say it's when Nikolai shoots Murphy because he's technically not zombified, but I have no idea.
Batman?
Robert.
Okay, George Trevor?
Don't know. This was my only opportunity for a point this week. I'm sure it's the guy in the bathroom. I can see it, reading it. He puts him out his misery.
He does, yeah. It's a good farm.
Fuck. I was going to say Derek. Robert, I'm going to even go as far as say Robert doesn't sound right. Derek. I don't know. I'm going to say Derek. But
Derek. It's not Derek. It is Robert. A point to Batman.
Robert.
Well done.
Ron.
No, Derek Wesker, of course, is due to appear. Here we go. So point to Batman. Well done. Well done. Question number 4. A timeline question from Vito here with Resident Evil Survivor. When was the date of the first report from Nikolai? Batman?
August 5th, 98.
George Trevor, did you know?
No, I honestly didn't. I'm not. There's no point even guessing. I have no idea because I just think something close to what John said. But I wouldn't even. I had 98, but nothing other than that. No.
Romby?
I knew it was August 98, but I didn't know the date. I'm going to guess 11th.
Stars Tyrant?
Likewise, I knew it was August 98 because it's the first page is the report on the mansion disaster.
Yes.
There's no point in me even trying to fucking guess now because I know John's going to have the answer right. I'll just stick with my original answer of August 98.
Batman is correct. It is the 5th of August 19th. Well, it depends. If you had I'd have believed you, Sean, if you had said I had the 5th in my mind. So there we go.
I honestly didn't. I knew it was August.
Shouldn't I win the whole thing by default if it was a veto question I got right?
Maybe. And finally, question. Well, this is the crux of your knowledge. This one. Question number 5: which popular band have their music played at the Biohazard Cafe in Tokyo? Batman, do you remember?
I can't remember this being mentioned on a previous podcast.
What was it? Alex mentioned it in episode 64.
Oh, it would help if I was there.
I know.
No idea. Bloody Def Leppard. I don't know.
Def Leppard. George Trevor.
My initial answer was the Big E.
And it's completely.
I misunderstood the question.
Yeah. Think of a band.
Well, it's going to
Or a
obviously
group.
be a Japanese band, and I don't know any J-pop bands really.
I'll give you a clue. It's not J-pop.
No.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
But it's obviously it has to be a Japanese. Presumably, it's bars in Japan. I don't know. I've no idea. Elton John.
Elton John. Okay. Starren.
Well, until you said it's not a Japanese band, I was going to say Rise, who obviously did Gunshot
yes.
for
Yep.
Dead Aim. I have no. Spice Girls, Nick.
Spice Girls. Interesting.
Aren't they
Rombie.
retired?
Yeah, Sean just took what I was about to say because I remember Alex telling us about the people getting up to dance.
Got something in the pinch of my mind.
Was it Spice Girls? I'm like, was it Spice Girls? Was it Vinger Boys? Was it something like that? It was so bad. Whatever it was, I'm going with. I wanted to say Spice Girls, but because Sean's already said, I'm going to say Vinger Boys.
If it's Venga Boys, I'll concede the whole series to Rob.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Do you remember that?
I remember
Oh
Alex
my
telling us,
God.
and it's now bugging me because I remember the description, but I cannot remember which music he said. Oh, this is infuriating.
When you first asked that question, the first thing that jumped into my head was Spice Girls, and now you've said about Alec, I'm thinking as a memory just pinched the back of my brain and is informing that. Nick, take it away.
Your memory serves you well. It is the Spice Girls.
What the hell?
I knew it was.
What is this series coming to?
The moment Rob said about Alex and him mentioned it, I'm thinking, fucking hell, I think that's where it's come from.
I shouldn't have said that. Damn it.
There we go. There we go. How are you coping there, Batman?
I mean, we've talked about the games straying too far from the origins. This Resident Evil quiz. If we're now getting Spice Girls as the correct answer, I mean, it's time to quit, isn't it?
Let's have a look at the final scores of the final edition of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz of this series. This week's winner is Batman with 2 points. Well done. Well done. In joint second, Rombie and Stars Tyrant with a solitary point. George Trevor holding everyone else up with a 0 out of 5 this week. So that does conclude, as I said, the final Neptune's Biohazard Quiz for the season. But as this is the season end, we must actually crown an overall winner. So factoring in tonight's result, let's have a look at the final scores as per the number of quiz victories you have scored throughout season 6.
Poor John's at a disadvantage of the number of episodes he was away for.
Has he?
Maybe,
Let's have a look. With 1 quiz victory, it's George Trevor.
Dear, oh dear.
Congratulations. Well done. Tying equally with Guest. So well done.
Thank you so much.
No worries. With 3 quiz victories, 4 if you count Biohazard Stars, is Rombie. Congratulations. Also with 3 quiz victories is Stars Tyrant. 4
here we go.
4 if you count Biohazard Stars. But the overall quiz winner with 4 is still the Batman. Well done. Well done.
Awesome. Have I ruined your plans by winning tonight?
No, well, question I hear you ask though is, what does this all mean? What does it all mean? Well, ask no more. The season finale round is here, and everyone is in with a shout. I hope you like classic game shows as we play a game I am tentatively calling Neptune's Price is Right.
Welcome to Neptune's Price is Right.
I'll buy it at a high price. Got some rare things on sale, stranger. Got a selection of good things on sale, stranger.
If he's not writing his confidential reports, he's watching a movie about a giant killer fish. It's your host, Nick, better known as Neptune.
So welcome to Neptune's Price is Right. The crowd are electric, so let's meet our contestants. Batman, come on down. Do I have to?
Don't fall down those steps, John. He's getting old.
Stars Tyrant, come on down. Rombie, come on down. And George Trevor, come on down. By the way, I hope you've watched Price is Right. Is it in New Zealand?
I've seen it at some
That's
point.
okay.
There's
fine.
been variations. I've seen it at various points. Don't worry.
I'm your host, Neptune, and it's nice to see you. We are here to play a series of games with some wonderful, fictitious prizes. As always, with The Price is Right, you'll be faced with some glorious items that you need to bid on. The person who bids the closest will win the prize and the points. Remember, you can be anywhere under, but not £1 over. But first, we need to find out who's going to bid first. So this is where your quiz victories come in crucial. So our overall quiz winner has been the Batman. So you can decide if you want to bid first or last.
John is actually silently dying in the corner. I can hear him.
I'm just very confused. I haven't got a clue what's going on.
Batman, did you want to bid first or last?
He's abandoned Mike.
Is he gone?
He's run off.
Sorry, I just had to have a moment there.
Bagging his head.
I'll bid last. They don't understand what's going on.
You'll get it. Very, very good tactically. So here we go. Only the best two players will go through to tonight's showcase. So think carefully. And in the event of a draw, previous quiz results will be considered. So without further ado, let's have a look at that first item.
Well, looky here. We have a gorgeous wooden beer stein mug, handmade in rural Spain, suitable for Tapa beer. This edition comes with 3 cat's eye jewels already inserted.
It's how much is that worth in Resident Evil 4 if you sell it to the merchant? Yes. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
You get it.
It's a great idea for a quiz, but...
It is. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's pissed off because I'm...
We know Batman's going last. So, Rombie, what is your bid, sir?
15,000.
15,000. Remember, you can go any under, but not £1 over. Stars Tyrant, what is your bid for this beautiful Beerstein mug?
I thought it was 30,000.
George Trevor, what is your bid on the Beerstein mug with 3 cat's eye jewels inserted?
Well, with all the jewels inserted, I was thinking 20,000. It's pesetas, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, 20,000.
Batman,
I'm going to say 35,000.
35,000. Oh, there's the bell. Someone is spot on. Congratulations, George Trevor. It is worth £20,000.
I don't want to sound ungrateful. Why can't I get the law questions right, man? Fucking Price is Right question. Oh, dear,
point to 20,000, whatever currency it needs to be. Here's your second item. Listen carefully for all you cat lovers out there.
A beautiful 24-carat gold link statue. This item, also from rural Spain, comes with 3 eyes, all of which are befitted with beautiful gems.
As a winner of the last one, George Trevor, you can go first.
I'm taking this quiz far too seriously. I'm spending this long thinking about it. 10,000. Oh, no, wait, sorry, how many jewels? Sorry?
All with the 3 jewels.
With the 3. Oh, can I reduce 7,000? I think I've gone a bit high there. 7.
Stars Tyrant.
18,000.
Rombie.
I'm going 30.
Batman.
15.
Wow, I can say that all of you are under correct answer and the correct value of the golden link statue, 35,000. So, yes, a point to Rombie. Well done, you. Now, here's your third item.
Known as the Heart of Africa, this stunning transparent gem was procured from West Africa, but only by someone who was able to repel a god within the 7-minute deadline that's provided.
Rombie is winner from the last one. You can go first. What is your bid?
Quite valuable. I'm going to say 50,000.
Stars Tyrant.
I think that is one of the 2 most valuable items in RE5, and I think it's... Can we go with the same?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think you can in Price is Right.
Then I'll go 40,000 then.
40,000.
I think it's quite high. If I can't have the same as Rob, I'll go 40.
George Trevor.
75,000.
Batman, what is your bid?
80,000.
I'm afraid you are all over. It's only 10,000 for the Heart of
What?
It is. Yes, very low, very low.
You'd think something that you have to put that much effort into.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've completely forgotten that.
No points.
Mind you, last time I played it, Nick, it was with you, and we didn't beat him.
We didn't get anywhere near that. So
I
no
haven't even
points.
completed Resident Evil 5. I refuse. It's like I stormed out. Like when I stormed
and
out.
your membership card now.
No, I stormed out of the cinema. I'm not. It's not survival horror. I don't accept this. Sorry.
This is the game, not the movie.
No, I know. It was my version of storming out the cinema.
Okay.
I didn't rage quit. I just depressed quit.
Closest person there was Stars Tyrant, but he was over, I'm afraid. So you can't bid over. Not in this game.
I don't take it personally.
Your fourth item.
What a wonderful collection of brand new products from Nico's Hardware in Dulvey, Louisiana. We have a high-grade tree saw, 4 lots of premium strength rope, and 20 pet collars. Don't forget to add the tax to this.
What's your bid? Stars Tyrant, you can go first.
$56.
George Trevor.
I was thinking the number, because I remember reading this, might allude to something in the game. I can't think if it's relevant, even the number in it. So I'm trying $100.
Romby.
$450.
Batman.
I remember thinking it was quite expensive for what he'd bought. I think it's something like $600.
Get a lot cheaper up north of that stuff, wouldn't you?
Oh, why?
The correct answer and the value of these 4 wonderful items, $586.21. Romby, you take the point as being the closest, because I'm afraid, Batman, you are over. Cannot bid over. There we go. And our final item.
We have recovered a bag of swag that was suspiciously says bribe on it. It must be the secret payments made to the chief in 1996. Payments were made in April, September, October, November, and December.
How much is this, Romby?
Oh, God. 680,000.
George Trevor.
Are these Birkin's payments from Resident Evil 2?
From Outbreak, yeah.
Oh.
But yes, it's the same thing, but it's the files from Outbreak.
Yeah. Was there nothing? It wasn't a file in 2 about
There is,
payments? 50,000.
Stars Tyrant.
80,000.
Batman.
15,000.
Well, the total value of the swag, $20,500. Point to Batman. Well done. So let's have a look. Who is the overall winner of the first round of Neptune's Price is Right? The two players going through to the final, and for your showcase is the Batman and Romby. Congratulations. So it is Romby and Batman to bid to become a champion of Season 6 of the podcast. So here we are. Congratulations, you two. The winner of this round will decide who is the Season 6 champion. Now we're going to show you a lot of prizes here. You must mentally add them up in your head and then make that winning bid. As a reminder, you could be anywhere under it, but not £1 over it. But in the event both of you are over, we'll see who's the closest.
This has turned into the generation game.
This, gentlemen, is your showcase.
Your showcase begins with a dazzling pear and ruby gem from West Africa, a perfect gift for a loved one, provided they aren't infected with Las Plagas, of course. But never fear, because if they are, you can give her this, a dead bride's necklace. This charming neck jewelry comes with a beautiful African design that would look fantastic on anyone, dead or alive. And looking good is essential if you want to live it up when you jet off to the world-famous Raccoon City Jazz Festival. That's right, taking place in Raccoon Park between the 19th and 20th of September. We're paying that entrance fee. And don't think we're scrimping on the accommodation either. Oh no, as you'll be staying one night at the magnificent Never on Fire Apple Inn. Room 101 is waiting for you and includes a full room service, laundry, and a service charge, even a finger-licking afternoon tea. And what's more, we're throwing in some spending money as well. That's right, courtesy of Hector, the best friend to the RPD officer Wes, the money he was lent to him. It's yours. Spend it however you like whilst exploring this beautiful Midwestern city. But one more thing you won't need to spend that money on is a brand new first edition Charlie doll. That's right, this exclusive collectible toy from Toy Uncle will now be yours at its introductional price. A glorious memento from your holiday in Raccoon City, as long as you're out by the 1st of October. It's an exciting showcase and will all be yours if the price is right.
Wow, so there you go, you have it. I'm sure everyone will agree.
Well done, Nick. That was very well.
Thank you.
That was very good. Well done.
This is simply a life-changing or even life-ending showcase, and it can all be yours if you give me the cost of this showcase. As a reminder, you have the ruby pear gem, the dead bride's necklace, the entrance fee to the jazz festival, one night at the Apple Inn. That's spending money.
Sorry, these are like prizes on Bullseye at the end.
And that limited edition Charlie doll. The tension is unbearable here, ladies and gentlemen. So, Batman, Can you give me your bid? What is your bid on the showcase?
200 quid.
No, seriously.
Yeah, 300 quid then.
£300?
Yeah.
£300. Romby, what is your bid on these items?
15,700.
Yeah, I think we've got a winner here.
15,000.
700.
700. Both of you are way off. But one of you is less way off than the other person. Our winner for Series 6 of Neptune's Biohazard quiz. It's the Batman! Congratulations! With £300 as being your guess. The actual answer is £3,640 and 53 pence. Congratulations, Batman!
Well, it's that silly rule if you go a pound over. I knew I'd bet 10p and I'd probably be safe.
The answers to all the questions, in case you were wondering, £1,000 or whatever the currency is for the Ruby Pair Gem, £2,000 for the necklace, $10 for the entrance fee, 12.
I remember that one.
You remember that one? $12 for the afternoon tea, Applin, $600 for the money you owed, and $18.53 for the Charlie doll. So, what an ending to the show! What an ending to the season! I've been Neptune, your Biohazard quiz host. Join us next podcast for the start of a brand new series. Good night. There we go. That does finish our podcast and season end. I hope everyone enjoyed our little escapade into British game show history. There we go. But thank you everyone as well for calling in, and a big thank you to Proppy54 for your voiceover talents there with the ending to Neptune's Price is Right. Very much appreciated, Mark. Coming up on our next podcast and the start of season 7, you're going to just have to wait and see, but you won't have to wait too long for it. So keep your eyes open and keep an eye on all our social media outlets for episode 70. But on that note, I'd like to thank everyone again for all their call-ins and contributions to this podcast. It is goodbye from me, Neptune.
Goodbye from me, Batman.
Goodbye from me, Stars Tyrant.
Bye from me, George Trevor.
And goodbye from me, Robbie.